Okay, ladies and gentlemen, once again, if I could ask you to take your seats and we can get things underway. Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. My name is Alexander Benjamin. I'm the Vice Chairman here at the European Jewish Association. You're all extremely welcome to our delegation to Auschwitz and to this symposium today. We have a lot to get through this afternoon. Just before we start, for those of you who are social media savvy and anything that comes up during a conference or anything that you'd like to post, I'd ask you kindly and gently if you wouldn't mind using our hashtags, which are hashtag not on my watch, hashtag EGA Auschwitz 2025, and hashtag never forget to never repeat. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, ministers, members of parliament, welcome. We meet at a time when anti-Semitism had exploded to levels last seen at the time of the Kristallnacht. To remind ourselves what it is we're talking about and what it is we're dealing with in Europe right now, I'd ask you to have a quick look at the screens, and we're going to watch a video together. Thank you.
This is the last time things were this bad. We said never again. But here we are, again.
Israel is a terrorist state! Victory to the Intifada!
Dozens of Jewish graves were desecrated in this cemetery in southern Belgium. Beatings and assaults have also been reported.
Fils de pute! Charmota! كنت عقلك الزمن الطندرة لا ميك إسرائيل بزاف.
The facts don't lie, and these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. Incredibly, the worst pogrom since World War II, October 7th, led to a huge increase in Jew hatred. They tried to say anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism were different. They are not. Others understood.
An old evil is resurfacing in Europe.
Child killers, poisoners, capitalists, communists, controllers, usurpers, colonialists. The oldest hatred doesn't die. It just adapts. It fits whatever is happening in the world. The war in Gaza means every Jew in Europe is a target for hate. Because we support the world's only Jewish state, we are denied the right to exist. They attack us. They insult us. They spit on us. Because we are Jews. Never again. Ladies and gentlemen, never again is now.
A sobering video, ladies and gentlemen, and a reminder of what it is we're all doing here. It gives me great pleasure now to open the symposium and introduce you to an esteemed colleague of mine, a gentleman who just recently took up his function as Secretary General of the European Jewish Association, Mr. David Leger. David, please join me.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies, Rabbi Menachem Margolin, members of national and European parliaments, ministers, ambassadors, community leaders, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It is a true honor to welcome you here today in Krakow, a city that once stood at the heart of Jewish life in Europe. Before the war, these streets were filled with Jewish voices, prayers, laughter, and ideas. There were Jewish schools, theaters, newspapers, and synagogues. And the Jewish communities helped to shape the very identity of this city. Then came darkness. The Holocaust was the darkest chapter in human history, taking the lives of 6 million Jews. But it was not only those lives, it was also the destruction of a world of language, art, scholarship, and faith, a world that had given so much to Europe and that was almost entirely erased. That is why we gather here. We come not only to remember what happened, but to turn remembrance into responsibility, because memory alone is not enough. It must guide us to act, to educate, and to protect. Today, we face a new reality that carries echoes of the old one. Hatred against Jews has taken new forms. The lies are familiar, but the language has changed. Jews are accused of crimes simply because they support the right of Israel to exist. Anti-Semitism has become Israelized. It hides behind politics, yet it carries the same poison as before. You have all seen our logo this year, the Israeli flag with the word Jude written across it. It is not meant to provoke, it is meant to make us realize the truth, that the same mark once used to isolate and persecute Jews in Europe is now being placed upon the Jewish state and upon Jews everywhere. The hatred has changed its appearance, but not its purpose. And we have all seen what that hatred leads to. Only a few weeks ago in Manchester, Jews were murdered in their synagogue during a prayer. Families shattered, a community left in fear. We have been warning about this for years now. So where does it end? When will countries in Europe take this seriously? Do we need murders in every country before their governments listen? And how do we move from listening to acting? These are some of the questions we will discuss here today. Because when we walk through the quiet streets of Kazimierz, we feel the emptiness that remains. And as we look across Europe today, we feel that same cold wind again. Anti-Semitism is rising, hate is taking hold, but this time we are not silent. We are here because remembrance must lead to responsibility, because the lessons of the past demand courage in the present. And to all of you who have joined us here today, thank you. Lawmakers, diplomats, community leaders, educators, friends, you are not only our partners in this work, you are our hope. Your presence here shows that we are not standing alone, and it shows that this time, as hate grows stronger, we are stronger too. Together, we carry the memory of those who were lost, but we also carry the duty to defend the living. Together, we can make sure that the words "never again" are not only remembered, but kept. So thank you for being here, and thank you for standing with us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David. Appreciated. Thanks are also due to our partners for this conference as well. That is the Maccabi World Union and, of course, Action and Protection League based in Hungary. And it'd be safe to say that this delegation, this symposium wouldn't in fact have taken place if it wasn't for the efforts and often Herculean efforts of the chairman of the European Jewish Association, Rabbi Menachem Margolin. I invite you now to join us and open the symposium. Thank you.
Ministers, members of parliament, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, community leaders, a dear friend Harley Lippman from the United States, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to our delegation and our symposium. It is not easy to gather at such a moment when Europe faces a taste of conscience once again. In a world overwhelmed by crisis and endless demand of our time, your choice to be here with us means a great deal to us. Thank you very much. You just saw the video. This is only a small taste of what it is like to be a Jewish in Europe today. The situation is nothing short of a disaster. How was this allowed to happen? It is said that success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And once again, the Jewish communities have been left holding the orphan baby. Today we will discuss why this happened and find answers and solutions to this failure. And it is, ladies and gentlemen, a failure. When Jews are murdered for being Jewish, it is a failure. When our children cannot walk freely wearing a kippah, it is a failure. When synagogues and schools stand behind fences and guns, it is a failure. When many thousands of Jews feel safer moving to a war zone in Israel than stay in Europe, it is a failure. And instead of standing here talking about the need to remember and to honor the victims of the Holocaust, we must spend time talking about the present danger affecting Jewish today. Instead of talking about creating the conditions for a shared and happy Jewish future, I am forced to talk about our very survival here in Europe. And I cannot believe that in 80 odd years since the Holocaust, the vast majority of Jews are today thinking actively about self-defense and protecting themselves. Because to date, governments have not been doing the job. We are currently training rabbis and lay leaders all around Europe in Krav Maga techniques. It sounds absurd, but it's reality. Jewish communities are asking us, if governments won't protect us, how do we protect ourselves? What can we do? What can we buy to defend ourselves? And we ask ourselves, what should we answer them? Should we lobby for the Jews to be allowed to carry a taser or a pepper spray? We are asking these questions because every day we are approached, insulted, and threatened. Many Jews put their heads down, walk away. It is degrading. It is humiliation. No citizen in Europe should ever have to live this way. And each time it happens, it could be a knife, a gun, a fist, or a foot against us and our families. We do not want to carry knives around or guns. But sitting back, ladies and gentlemen, and doing nothing is no longer an option. We want to protect ourselves, our families, and our children. And we have to be honest, the fact that this is actually part of our conversation, standing here at a delegation marking Kristallnacht, is it in itself another tragic failure. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you all, each and every one of you, to fight the hate that threatened to swallow us again. I hope this symposium helps you. I hope it will give you an ideas, and inspiration how to make Europe free of hate, because we need you now more than ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rav Margolin. Our next speaker was violently attacked by left staffers in the European Parliament and was also named as the politician with the most hate speech directed against them on social media in Sweden, only because she has the audacity to defend Israel and the Jewish people. I would urge you as well to take a look at her parliamentary videos and the many speeches that she gives in the European Parliament. It gives me great pleasure and indeed much honor to introduce for an opening statement Mrs. Alice Teodorescu Malve, member of the European Parliament and chair of the European Parliament's Working Group Against Anti-Semitism. Thank you. You're very welcome. You're okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Margolin, for inviting me. Dear Prime Minister, ministers, members of Parliament, ambassadors, rabbis, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. From birth, we each possess the seeds of both good and evil. These seeds sprout in a soil composed of reason, empathy, and conscience, but also of fear, selfishness, and indifference. Each of us decides how we want to cultivate our inner garden, what is allowed to thrive, and what is never permitted to take root. The parts we water and nurture grow. The parts we ignore wilt and die. And like animals, we can decide how we will act in any given moment. Everything that happens around us is the result of human actions. The actions of the evil, the ones of the indifferent, and the ones of the good. When the Hungarian author Imre Kertész was awarded the 2002 Nobel Prize in Literature, he was asked how he views evil. His response was that the interesting question is not why one chooses to be evil, but why one chooses to be good. In a presence that echoes the past, the insight that each of us is able to choose good above evil, action above indifference, is a badly needed reminder that nothing is predetermined. In every meeting, every discussion, and every disagreement, we all face a choice: to be good or evil, to speak out, to defend, to question, to denounce. We cannot choose the challenges life gives us, but we can choose how we respond. Students and teachers can choose not to tolerate attempts to turn classrooms into incubators of anti-Semitism. Journalists and authors can choose not to spread anti-Israeli propaganda that dilutes the truth. Decision makers and judges can choose to act against those who demonize Jews and the state of Israel in an attempt to legitimize anti-Semitism. In fact, on a daily basis, each of us is confronted with choices, both large and small, that determine how the future will judge the present. If more people had stood up against the developments of the 1930s, the 1940s would have been very different. If more people stand up against what has happened since the 7th of October, we can still change what tomorrow will become. Remember that in this uncertain moment, as the future of Europe's Jews and of Europe itself as a civilized continent is determined, not choosing other paths is also making a choice. There is a before and an after the 7th of October, just as there was a before and after Kristallnacht, the prelude to the Holocaust 87 years ago. We must rise above the failures of those, good, evil, and indifferent alike, who came before us. We must ensure that the abyss of hate manifested against Jews and the State of Israel in the aftermath of the worst pogrom since the Holocaust is uncompromisingly stifled and stigmatized once again. We must never forget that the spark that ignites the anti-Semitic fire can only be extinguished by those who understand that it did not begin with the Holocaust, but it always ends with that. If the small steps of tyranny are allowed to desensitize the collective sense of morality, between the first and the last steps are all the small steps that pacify, normalize, and ultimately makes us immune, robbing us our initiative and binding us to our own shortcomings. Auschwitz, just an hour from here, has come to be seen as the epicenter of evil, the absolute zero of mankind. Nowhere else has the complex meaning of what it is to be human been so profoundly challenged. Humanity's antithesis, embodied as completely inhumanity, reached its climax in the gas chambers. But the driving force behind the Holocaust was not solely a form of abstract evil. It was preceded and amplified by thousands of years of anti-Semitism. The use of the snuffed out fate of Europe's Jews, the use of the words never again as an expression of a universal wish to eliminate human suffering, war, and racism in general has made anti-Semitism's specific characteristics general and thereby complicated modern understanding of the mobilizing power of anti-Semitism, now as then. This is why it is not enough to remember the Holocaust if you haven't learned anything of what led to it. It is not enough to remember the dead Jews if you're not prepared to make a difference for the living. If Europe's synagogues are not to become monuments to the Jewish life that was once found on this continent, we must stand up for life itself. Jewish life cannot survive in the mental ghetto where many Jews are forced to seek refuge. No life can thrive in the shadows of fear and self-censorship. Regardless of who we are or where we come from, each of us must choose to water the seed of good, to cultivate our humanity every moment of every day. When others remain silent, you must speak out. When others hesitate, you must stand firm. The truth is that if you don't stand up for the Jews of today, you wouldn't have stand up for the Jews of the past either. The future is not determined by fate. It grows from whispers that rise to shouts, from cautious steps that risk trampling reason. These are the choices that ultimately determine the difference between civilization and barbarism, between humanity and inhumanity. Thank you.
Thank you for those wonderful words. And ladies and gentlemen, we are in Poland, one of the safest countries in Europe for Jews. And it's now my great honor to welcome Mrs. Maria Eszart, who's the Under Secretary of State at the Ministry of Justice for the Republic of Poland, to say some opening remarks. Under Secretary, please.
Ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, I would like to thank you for inviting me here and for the privilege to say a few words of the opening of this important conference. Warm welcome to Poland, today in Kraków, city of reborn Jewish life. On the occasion of the commemoration of the 87th anniversary of the Kristallnacht, I have the honor today to represent the Republic of Poland. May the memory of this day be a call to action for all of us to fight anti-Semitism in all its forms and to work for peace, respect, and cooperation between nations. I'm honored to be able to speak today before such a distinguished group of activists from the European Jewish Association. Your work cannot be overestimated. Now it's plain to see that within the current European context, as a key element of the European Jewish Association mission is to counteract the soaring anti-Semitism. This is the leading topic I'm quite certain will be discussed during today's symposium. I would like to thank you, all members of the European Jewish Association engaged in writing and sharing with us the extensive comments on the draft of Poland's strategy to combat anti-Semitism. My special words of cooperation go to Honorable Rabbi, as well as Mr. Juan Caldes, for their tremendous commitment. We are very grateful for your kindness, willingness to help, for all suggestions. We very much hope to continue our good cooperation in the future. We also hope for further development of cooperation between the European Jewish Association and the Social and Cultural Association of Jews in Poland, Towarzystwo Społeczno-Kulturalne Żydów w Polsce, the oldest and largest organization representing the Jewish national minority in Poland, our important partner. We are all aware of the sharp increase of anti-Semitic incidents around the world following the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. Recently, this dangerous trend has become clearly visible even in Poland, where the situation has been relatively calm so far, and the anti-Semitism had a rather traditional form, even sometimes folkloric. But let me mention some recent examples in Warsaw, Gdańsk, Kraków, and Września, in which we had to deal with a boycott, disruption of artistic performances, cancellation of events with the participation of guests from Israel. In light of all these challenges, I would like to emphasize with a special power that on October 28th, last week, the draft resolution of the Council of Ministers on the adoption of the National Strategy for Countering Anti-Semitism and Supporting Jewish Life for 2025-2030 was entered into the list of legislative and programmatic work of the government of Poland. Currently, the official consultation stage will take place. I truly believe that by the end of this year, the Polish government will adopt the strategy, our first Polish strategy. We have high hopes for appointment as a part of the strategy of a government coordinator who will be responsible for directing and synchronizing government actions in the area of countering anti-Semitism and supporting the Jewish community in Poland. On behalf of the Polish government, I declare that we will do everything to provide him or her with all tools necessary for efficient cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Under-Secretary of State. That concludes the opening remarks. Now, we know, and we started out with the fact that anti-Semitism is at alarmingly high levels, and we've all seen the headlines. But we wonder, and in fact, many Jews across Europe say that we actually think the figures are much worse, and the published figures that we're seeing are just literally the tip of the iceberg. So, and are we even measuring anti-Semitism correctly? Let's talk about it. And here to do just that is a good friend of the European Jewish Association, Professor Dr. Christer Mattsson, who's the director of the Segerstedt Institute in Sweden. He researches radicalization processes in individuals and groups in right-wing extremist and national socialist circles. He's also very, very active in studies that focus on prevention work against violent extremism in general. And pertinently to this conference, he conducts research on education about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Here to present a new way of looking at anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, it gives me great, great pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Professor Christer Mattsson. Please join us.
So, thank you very much for those kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, distinguished guests, it's a great honor to be here today to present my research, or the research of my team. The study that I'm about to present will be published later the coming winter. The study as such is groundbreaking. That, of course, is anticipated from any professor to claim of his or her research. But I will make a short summary of the research in a minute or so, and then I will account for it in 15 minutes, and then I will conclude. So please bear with me. Now it will be a bit academic. Over the last 2 years, as you already heard in the opening, we have faced a fiercely spiking anti-Semitism globally. This is particularly true when it comes to the Western world. At the same time, we have received information and studies, attitude surveys, suggesting that the level of anti-Semitism as an attitude has not shifted at all, and particularly in the Western world, is on a very low level. So how can it be that we, on the one hand, have a spiking anti-Semitism in deeds, in actions, and at the same time, we have a very low level of anti-Semitism? For me, as a scholar, that means that at least one of these data points must be wrong. They are contradicting each other. I would also say that this falls in line with what we refer to as the anti-Semitic paradox. Being accused of being an anti-Semite is socially very stigmatizing. Nobody wants to stand up, with very few exceptions, to say that I am an anti-Semite. Being accused of being a racist is no good. Being accused of being a bigot or being misogynist is no good at all, but being an anti-Semite is socially very unacceptable. This leads that we put very high standards in accepting what is anti-Semitism. We are very easily rushing to excusing anti-Semitism. When we are measuring anti-Semitism, we are using more or less, independently of what institute conducts the studies, globally or locally, nationally, we're using almost the same sort of questions to the different panels that take part in the study. These questions are what we call in research constructs. And each construct falls back to one of the three claims, either that Jews are immensely powerful, Jews are incredible evil, Jews are incredible deceitful. What we have heard over the last 2 years in the spike of anti-Semitism is very seldom, particularly in the Western world, anyone accusing Jews of anything. As we heard, they are accusing Zionists. The collective Jew, the traditional anti-Semitic stereotype, has developed into the collective Zionist. The traditional anti-Semitic stereotypes, the powerful, the evil, and the deceitful Jew, have been conveyed onto the collective Zionist. So the contemporary anti-Semitic discourse do not talk about Jews. They don't address the bloodthirsty Jew, but the diabolic, evil Zionists. So when we have asked the questions in this survey about the Jews, I think that people, particularly in the Western world, honestly don't think that they have anything against Jews, but they are thinking about Zionists. And as good researchers, we decided to test out, are we really measuring anti-Semitism in the correct way? And now we don't see the PowerPoint. Now we see the PowerPoint, that's good. Okay, so what we have here is what we have already said, several of us from the stage. The anti-Semitism spike immediately after October 7th. The war in Gaza didn't even start when the anti-Semitic deeds started. And the pattern, the data is collected differently, but the pattern is the same, particularly in the Western world. So what we set out to do was to see, from the Swedish example, that Sweden is considered as the least anti-Semitic country in the world, but we have a lot of data suggesting that we have a problem with anti-Semitism in Sweden. So we asked ourselves, do we have inadequate methods of measuring anti-Semitic attitudes in the society? We also know, as I said, that the category Jew is culturally unacceptable to use in a denouncing way. And it has also been proved in research since long before that Zionists, Zionism has been a code word or a dog whistling for Jews. And a lot of studies after October 7 has indicated that this has intensified during the last 2 years. And where shall I point this? There. So our aim was to explore the difference in acceptance of anti-Semitic stereotypes when expressed in relation to Jews or to Zionists. So what we did is something that is very, very uncommon in social science. We conducted an experimental study. I will explain it a little bit more in detail. So what we did was that we took 2 samples of participants, we randomized them, so half of them answered question about Jews. The other half answered the exact same questions about Zionists. And this we did in 3 different countries, in Sweden, UK, and the US. Totally, in the entire study, we had 9,000 participants, so it's a very robust data set that we've been working with. The questions that we were asked were 7 questions concerning that Jews are particularly evil, that they are indifferent to other people's suffering, that they are controlled media, so on and so forth. Those 7 questions are not our questions. They arrive from other studies that are measuring and informing us about the level of anti-Semitism that is supposedly on a low level in the Western world. So we took those 7 constructs, those 7 questions, we kept them, and we gave them to half of our participants. The other half, we exchanged the term Jew to the term Zionist to see if we would have a different response. And we also conducted a list experiment, and this is academically a bit more complicated, but we know when people take part in studies like this, there's a tendency that they answer in accordance to social desirability. When they have a load of questions about Jews, it is likely that they understand that the researchers are interested in anti-Semitism and they correct their answers. So in a list experiment, you ask questions that are completely unrelated and you have just one construct. Like this, we ask 4 questions about their views on genders, about their views on being a garbage collector. So we have one control group that doesn't have a construct at all. And we have one group that are asked about Jews' control of media. And we have a third group that are asked also about Zionist control of media, hidden together with other questions, and they can choose to agree with as many as they pleases. I will get back to this because this is quite important for understanding what anti-Semitism really looks like today. So we had the traditional background factors. The result from the survey experiment looks like this. In the Swedish case, which is, by all existing measurements, the lowest level of anti-Semitism in the world, we had the result that was expected when we asked about Jews. If you marked number 1, that means strongly disagree with these statements. And as you can see, the vast majority are answering on level 1 or 2, which is disagreement with the statements. When we instead asked about Zionist, we have a completely different profile. What you can see here is that we are almost in the middle, in a neutral position in the overall population. That means that it is almost as common to agree with the anti-Zionistic statement as to disagree with them. In the UK, as expected, the level of anti-Semitism is a bit higher than in Sweden, but still quite low. Asking about their opinions about Zionists controlling the US government, controlling media, so on and so forth, you see a completely different profile again. And even clearer in the US being also, as expected, a little bit more anti-Semitic than the UK, than Sweden, but still the vast majority refrain from the statements. But when asked about Zionists, once again, you have the same profile. People tend to agree as often as to disagree with the statements that Jews control, that Zionists controlling media and so forth. So what we conclude is anti-Semitic tropes are significantly more accepted, legitimate in anti-Zionist discourses versus anti-Jewish discourses. So the anti-Zionist discourse and the anti-Jewish discourse are both anti-Semitic discourses. But one discourse is impossible to express, particularly in the Western world. The anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic discourse is disregarded. but the anti-Zionist discourse is much easier to express. So, but what are they really talking about? And then we get back to the list experiment. When people were able to choose whatever statement they agreed with without being quite sure what we as researchers were interested in, we could see that the gap between anti-Jewish anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist anti-Semitism decreased. It was not such a huge gap any longer. The social desirability gap was closing. They did not compensate themselves. And the way we interpret this is that it provides support for the notion that anti-Semitic attitudes are being concealed within anti-Zionist rhetoric. So they may talk about Zionist, but looking closer into it, what they really mean are Jews. So we have some overall conclusions. What we have been doing is to provide solid evidence of anti-Semitic tropes being more legitimate in anti-Semitic discourses than in anti-Jewish discourses. We have also been able to show that anti-Semitism is dressed up with anti-Zionistic rhetoric. On a methodological level, we have shown that we need to measure anti-Semitism differently if we want to cover the anti-Semitism that hits the streets in the Western world. And this is very complicated. What we have done is not measuring the level of anti-Semitism. We have proven that the way that it is measured in the Western world is inaccurate. And we need to rethink how to measure anti-Semitism. In academic terms, what we are measuring when we talk about Jews, we are measuring the so-called modern anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that came with the national state and ultimately leading to the Holocaust. The anti-Zionistic discursively anti-Semitism is the contemporary anti-Semitism, and it needs to be measured differently, but most probably not in the same way on a global level. The most important conclusion, I would say, is that we are at large measuring the wrong form of anti-Semitism currently, meaning that we are, as researchers, misinforming you as policymakers and politicians about the status of the level of anti-Semitism. You see, anti-Semitism cannot be reduced to emotions. Anti-Semitism is not something that just arrives from nothing. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory that has been around for centuries. Whenever the anti-Semite want to explain something that he or she cannot explain otherwise, out of their laziness, out of their ignorance, out of their indifference, the Jew is always there at hand, or the Zionist, to explain what else cannot be explained. And it is never gone. We all hope that the Gaza war is over. And we all expect, and rightfully so, that the anti-Semitic deeds will decrease as the war hopefully ends. But you have to understand that anti-Semitism as a conspiracy theory will still be around. When we are measuring the wrong form of anti-Semitism, you are being misinformed, believing that the level of anti-Semitism is quite low until the next outburst of anti-Semitic deeds. If we would have measured anti-Semitism academically more correctly, we would not have been so surprised to see the reaction as we've been seeing the last 2 years. There was never an increase of anti-Semitism. It was only that anti-Semitism was acted upon. But the level of anti-Semitism was always there and was always much higher than it has been accounted for in research. It is always there. It is always on a much higher level than accounted for in the West. Now that you know, you all have the opportunity as politicians, as policymakers, to work for a sustainable way of combating anti-Semitism. When the deeds are gone, the anti-Semitism is still there. We as scholars will make sure to measure it correctly, informing you that this plague is still around, and I hope that we can act upon this together. I will be happy to answer any question during the intermission, during the dinner tonight. I will be happy to make sure that you all receive the report once it is published. You can approach me, you can approach my colleague Richard Milling, who is our research coordinator. To us, this is very, very important that you have the information that anti-Semitism is not only what we see in the street, it is in the minds of the people, also in the Western world, and we need to monitor it in a much better way. Thank you for your attention.
Professor, Doctor, amazing as always. Thank you so much for that very, very important work. And we await the results of all of that research with anticipation and indeed with much interest. So thank you. We're going to move straight on to our political panel. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over once again to my colleague, Secretary General David Lega, who will handle things for the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for staying with us for all these important discussions that we are having all during this whole seminar. So now we will be joined by 5 political leaders who each will bring a national and European perspective on how to confront the growing link between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, as Professor Mattsson just talked to us about. And I'm grateful to each of you for being here with us in Krakow. Across Europe, we see this. We see how these two hatreds are increasingly becoming one. And we would like to understand how this looks in your own countries and to hear what the main challenges your Jewish communities are facing today are. So I will begin by first turning to France and Senator Laurence Rossignol from France. Please, if you would like to join me first. You want to stand here? I would just like to introduce a bit more. You're the Vice President of the Senate Delegation for Women's Rights and former Minister of Families and Women's Rights. France has seen a rise in anti-Semitic incidents and in public rhetoric that crosses from political criticism into hate. So, if I may ask you, Senator, how can France draw the line between legitimate debate and anti-Semitism, which is disguised as anti-Zionism?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear David, hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank to the European Jewish Association for inviting me. I'm truly honored to be there today, and I felt that despite a very busy time in Parliament, maybe you have heard about French situation, bringing together those who across Europe are fighting against the rise of anti-Semitism had to be a priority for me. I'm a French senator, a feminist, and a socialist. So today I'm speaking from my perspective as a woman in politics from the French left. I'd like to share two questions that I find essential, almost existential. First, why has there always been, through history and everywhere in the world, so much hatred towards Jews and towards women? Why do these ancient irrational hatreds persist even in democracies built on humanism and equality? I am deliberately linking women and Jews here, and perhaps that might surprise you. But I believe that both have long been victims of the same slanders, the same false images, the same rumors. They are always reduced to their essence. You are Jewish, you are a woman, and always seen through these lenses. I wanted to talk about that because my first commitment after the 7th of October has been to break the silence about rapes on the 7th of October, about these rapes which nobody wanted to talk, even my feminist activist friends. And I wrote tribunes, I gathered friends to make these rapes to be known, because rapes are always the weapon of genocide against women. My second question is, has the never again that followed the Holocaust after 1945 just been a brief parenthesis? It's a very difficult word to pronounce, parenthesis. Three keys facts define the situation in France today. We are the country with the largest Jewish population in Europe and the country with the largest Muslim population in Western Europe. In France, anti-Semitism is increasing, racism is increasing, and far right is increasing. It's quite a bad situation. But there is also on the left, a movement that claims to be progressive, yet now defines itself through anti-Zionism and has clearly drifted into anti-Semitism. For someone like me, fighting anti-Semitism means fighting on two fronts. A front on the left, I must stand up to those, not you, I must stand up to those who have made Gaza their only cause, to the point that some applauded what happened on October 7th. They are playing politics with a can of gasoline and a box of matches. They are encouraging young people, especially those from Arab and African backgrounds, not only to support the Palestinian cause, but to express hate toward Israel. For them, Israel is a genocidal state, colonial by nature, and one that should disappear. And yes, we may have heard, maybe you have heard Rima Hassan, this MP, European MP, elected on the LFI list. And on the other side, we also face the far-right bloc led by Marine Le Pen. She's Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter. And do you remember, maybe, this Jean-Marie Le Pen has been condemned many times by courts because of anti-Semitism. Today, the far right pretends to support Israel because, as they say, the enemies of their enemies are their friends. The enemies of our Muslims, these enemies, they are Muslims, Arabian people, Black people, and I can say they support Israel also because Israel is led by a far-right government pursuing a supremacist agenda. But behind this respectable facade, behind this supposed support for Israel, neo-Nazi and neo-fascist youth groups are growing up. They are anti-Semitic. They just like the movement and the figures they admire. The fight against anti-Semitism in France takes place on two fronts, on political fronts. The first thing we have to do is supporting Jewish citizens. They are afraid, and with reason. The rise in anti-Semitic acts and made many afraid to be visible as Jews, afraid to wear kippah, afraid to keep mezuzah on their doors. Our first mission, French government, French state, is to say to Jewish people, we protect you, we protect your synagogues. It will start with fighting every day against political Islamism and fundamentalism and all who are supporting these dreadful ideologies. Our second mission is to fight step by step against the lies, the constant conflation of Israel, Netanyahu, French Jews, and so-called genocidal. That false narrative only breeds anti-Semitism and brings no solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And finally, as parliamentarians, as women in politics, we fight in parliament. Several bills are currently being discussed or adopted. The first punishes anti-Semitism on university campuses. It creates a training obligation about anti-Semitism. The second bill declares that Zionism contributes to anti-Semitism and therefore should fall under the same criminal law. And the third, which will be debated in the Senate just on Wednesday, Thursday, 2 days later, aims to restore Captain Dreyfus, the military rank would have earned but not been the victim of an anti-Semitic conspiracy. That I wanted to share with you today, how we support and protect Jewish citizens in France in the face of rising anti-Semitism by refusing to let anything slide. How we confront argument by argument those who, in the name of the Palestinian cause, are calling for the end of the state of Israel. And how, in Parliament, we turn that fight into law. But let me end with one deep condition, and I want to share with you. We can only fight anti-Semitism effectively if we fight racism, supremacism, white or male supremacism with the same determination. Both are inseparable. The strength, sincerity, and integrity of our fight against racism give power and legitimacy to our fight against anti-Semitism, and vice versa. 10 years ago, on the 13th of November, Paris was victim of the most murderous terrorist attack in the Bataclan and on the Café Terrasse. Despite this horror, the French government has succeeded to maintain the cohesion, the social cohesion in our society. French Muslim citizens have not been designated as responsible or compliant for these attacks. Today, we have to follow the same way and repeat every day and loudly, French or European Jewish citizens are not responsible of the Netanyahu's policies in Gaza or in the West Bank. It's like that we are fighting against the increasing anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind, could I ask you one question? I know that the French Senate has endorsed the IRA definition, for example, and could you tell us, do you think there could be anything else could be done to make the definition of IRA more visible in public institutions, in schools? How can we do that in France? As a small follow-up, do you know? Do you have any thoughts on it? The IRA definition in combating yes? They're talking about the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. It needs to be more visible in the schools in France.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we have done in universities. and
Yes.
it is done so in schools. But it's true, it's not easy for teachers, because in some suburbs and in some schools, it's quite difficult to explain what is anti-Semitism, what is Holocaust to kids, and teachers have to be supported to do that by the ministry more than they are.
Because that's a long fight.
A long
Very good.
fight, thank you.
You're welcome to stay and welcome to go down.
Okay,
Thank you so much. And with that, I would love to have our next speaker coming up. It's MEP Lukas Mundell from Austria. He's a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Abraham Accords network within the European Parliament. Please, Lukas, my old colleague. You can choose if you want to sit or stand. You stand.
Thank you very much, David.
Could I ask you, I mean, you have worked so hard, the last mandate and this one, to promote understanding between Europe, Israel, and the Arab world. How do anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism appear in Austria and in the wider European political conversation, according to you? Please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks to the European Jewish Association. First of all, thanks for this timely gathering and the strong message it's sending out cross-party, cross-national borders all over Europe. That's really something. You've just mentioned, David, the Abraham Accords Network. I also want to emphasize who has founded the Abraham Accords Network in the European Parliament, also a multi-partisan endeavor. This was David Liga. This was you, and this deserves an applause, definitely. And while I'm extremely happy, I have to say, also listening to her today again, about the new colleague as of the beginning of the mandate, Alice Teodorescu-Mave. I very much regret that you left the European Parliament, but I congratulate the European Jewish Association to have you as a Secretary General now. Very good for the European Jewish Association, sad for the Parliament, I have to say. And David, you also became a personal friend, and this is rare in Brussels, and I'm grateful that we can keep the bridge also beyond jointly being in the European Parliament. Actually, I was thinking of having a panel discussion.
Yes.
But since also my predecessor went to this place, to the standing position to speak, I thought I would do the same. I follow the pattern, but I will follow you, especially what your plan is with the panel discussion. I want to be very clear in many regards, and I start right away with what's closest to my heart and to my mind. A few weeks ago, journalists from European media, very well-known European media, sent me the question, the whole questionnaire actually, but the main question was, will anti-Semitism in Europe now, due to the peace deal, decrease? And I said, I'm afraid no. And what Professor Mattsson just has told us emphasizes my thought behind that. Because anti-Semites, the anti-Semitic ideology, was only seeking for excuses, has been seeking for excuses, and will remain seeking for excuses to conduct anti-Semitic incidents, events, attempts, online and offline, of various kinds. And such an excuse was found with the actual fight for the existence of the only Jewish state on earth, of Israel. Regarding that, which is not our topic today, I'm rather concerned that I would say on a global scale, there's still a language about Hamas as if would be an actor to speak to and would be around. I can hardly understand that, but that's not our issue today. Also, the Abraham Accords, big part of the solutions for the region are not our main issue today, but anti-Semitism is, and the fight against anti-Semitism. So my second answer to the journalists was, the only way for anti-Semitism to decrease is to fight anti-Semitism. And every sane and sober person and every person of goodwill will do its part in fighting anti-Semitism. And I had a second point, that it's not only about fighting anti-Semitism. If we want to have governments, also parliaments, I would say a political landscape that really cares for a proper future, then it's about flourishing dwelling for Jewish communities all over Europe. It's not only about fighting anti-Semitism. It's about safe circumstances for Jewish communities, and we are far away from that. As we have heard at the beginning today, governments have not done their obligation, not in fighting anti-Semitism and not in conducting a positive future for Jewish life.
Could I ask you, I mean, the European Parliament often issues resolutions condemning anti-Semitism, but very few of them have practical follow-up. Do you think there are any way to have real implementation of what the European Parliament is saying? Do you think that maybe we need a single coordinated legal framework for combating anti-Semitism, similar to what exists for terrorism and money laundering?
The answer is yes, but not only, I would say. I mean, you're very experienced yourself, David, Alisis, also Jan Beat Ruijsen is, and other colleagues in negotiating resolutions of all kinds, also resolutions against anti-Semitism. And I have to say, first of all, parliamentarians themselves who care for the fight against anti-Semitism should know about these resolutions in order to be able to spread its messages. So we should not underestimate how strong the European Parliament, more than other European institutions, I have to say, sometimes manages to speak against anti-Semitism. Secondly, it's not only about resolutions, it's about a legal framework. But that doesn't take away any obligation from the local level, the regional level, the national levels also to do their part. And as I have emphasized with another regard before, it actually doesn't take away the obligation from each and everybody to take part in the fight against anti-Semitism. But of course, a legal framework, and I like your comparison, David, with anti-money laundering and other crimes, which are not as irrational as anti-Semitism, but also are cross-border crimes, in order to put it in a basket of not only emotions, as also Professor Mattsson said today, but of clear crimes that are committed.
And finally, before I let you go to the chairs or down, do you think there's any way to restore a sense of objectivity when it comes to discussing Israel and Jewish life at a time when so many prefer to stay neutral, even in the face of hate?
That's a very big question. This is what I wanted to refer to in my first answer, and I will be quick, but it seems to be important to me. In my view, only my personal view, what happened and what has happened in the last 2 years, especially the last half of a year and a bit more maybe, is that anti-Semites found, I would even dare to say, useful idiots, you know this expression, I dare to say that, useful idiots who conducted their cause. Even worse, as if it would be a kind of pop culture. This is what happened in the streets. I'm not very often in Brussels on weekends, but I was this weekend in Brussels. And I again have experienced such a protest, a demonstration with the flags we all know, and exactly what occurred all over Europe over all these years. So I think as they now see, they could use a tool to release anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of all kinds. They will seek for those tools. And for the time being, they still use the tool they had over the last 2 years, and they will find new tools because now they know how it tastes. And this is the worst thing I have to say today. It's not over. It's rather a kind of a beginning if we do not stop it.
Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you, dear Lucas. And now I'd love to invite to the stage also MP Tim Roca from the United Kingdom. He's a member of parliament and yeah, I'll let you come up first. I think he deserves an applause. So thank you so much for being with us as well. We know that Britain has a long and proud Jewish history, yet the horrific synagogue murders in Manchester reminded us of how fragile that safety can be. And how do you see this merging of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the UK today? And what are the biggest challenges for British society in confronting it?
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate it. It's such an important event. I just want to say my French colleague obviously spoke from the podium, so being British, I had to do the opposite. It's a form of tradition that we have. And also, thank you for raising the horrific attack that happened in Manchester. I know all our thoughts are with the family of Melvin Kravitz and Adrian Dolby as well, in what was such a clear-cut case of Jew hatred. That also demonstrates some of the things that we're discussing today, which is how anti-Semitism is also intersecting with anti-Zionism. And so for me, in terms of the challenges, three things stand out quite clearly. The first is the scale of the issue that we're facing. At the very start, we heard about the vast scale of anti-Semitic incidents in Europe and particularly in Britain. In the UK, it's at a record high, a slight dip in 2024 compared to 2023, but still extremely elevated at the very highest point it's been. And the figures are astonishing. 20% of all religious hate crimes are directed towards Jews, who are only 0.5% of the population. But it goes beyond those. It goes into the incidents, sometimes violent and physical, that we're seeing. If you speak to some people, they are shocked to learn that it's common and it is necessary for synagogues and schools to have security. They can't believe that there are fellow citizens of theirs who live in an environment where they are constantly under threat, and where when they leave the synagogue or the school, they may decide it's not safe for them to wear the kippah, that they have to hide their identity. And that's thoroughly unacceptable in this day and age in a Western society. The second challenge, I would say, is the one that the professors very well outlined before, which is how we're seeing the development of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, far-right ideologies, Islamist ideologies, how things are leaking into the online space and how they're being formed there. And I think we've got to be very alive to that. In the UK, we are making some progress with the Online Safety Act. We were one of the first countries to adopt the IRA definition that you were talking about before. We do provide funding for the Community Safety Trust, but there's a lot more we can be doing. But the final challenge I wanted to highlight was the political challenge. I'm a member of the Labour Party, and we had our own battle with anti-Semitism for the heart of the Labour Party. And if you told me when I first joined 20 years ago that I would be marching against my own party because it was failing to deal with anti-Semitism, I would never have believed you, but that's where we were. And I do think all of us, all politicians, it's incumbent on us to be vigilant to anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And I'm sad to say that in Europe, we're seeing signs of anti-Zionist rhetoric making its way into the political discourse of parties, and that's totally unacceptable. So some of the solutions, I mean, the first is to listen to the Jewish community. And we have in Britain some fantastic organizations who work extremely hard on behalf of their communities. We've got the Jewish Leadership Council, the Board of Deputies, the Community Safety Trust that I mentioned before. And they have come up with really powerful recommendations that I know the government is considering in tackling this wave of hatred that we're talking about. One, of course, is the anti-radicalization strategy the government has, Prevent, needs to be updated. It needs to clearly have a strand focusing on anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, be it far-right or Islamist. The Commission for Countering Extremism that we have in the UK, is it time that it has a specific commissioner that looks at anti-Semitic ideologies and how they're adapting and developing? Training and education are incredibly important. The government already funds some brilliant education, but in light of the changing nature of anti-Semitism, do we need to be updating that education and training? And as a corollary to that, I should say, I'm really looking forward to finally seeing the Holocaust Memorial Museum opening next to Parliament in Victoria Palace Gardens is an incredibly important part of making sure the memory of what happened is kept alive so that it never happens again. And we need to see greater police visibility supporting our Jewish communities, a hate crime action plan, and all of us as politicians need to speak out. And that's the final thing I would say, David, is we have to have the bravery in an environment where, of course, it is not right that British Jews, whether they're in the workplace, in the supermarket, are being held accountable for what's happening in the Middle East. It's totally wrong. And politicians need to call that out. And we know from what happened in this area that when politicians are silent, tragedy happens. And that's why we all have to be on the front foot and play our part.
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking that march as well. One final question. I think, how do you think, rather, what role should the British Parliament play in defining the line between free speech and incitement to hatred, especially on campuses and social media? How can the Parliament actually help there?
Well, the Parliament is the key place for those issues to be discussed. It's the crucible of our democracy. I'm very lucky here today, David, to be joined by parliamentary colleagues from the Labour Party, Michael Payne, Paul Kohler from the Liberal Democrats. I think Boris will be here later. On this issue, we stand as one. On Brexit, I have a completely different view, but I promise I won't heckle him. But I think we need to have a serious and grown-up debate, because we all know, and there'll be people in this audience who are better versed in the law than I am, that no rights are absolute, or very few rights are absolute. They're balanced. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech is balanced against people's right to safety, to be able to worship without fear or intimidation. And in the online space, I believe that what you say online is exactly as it should have the same consequences as if you were saying it in public somewhere. What I would also say, I know I'm running over time, is we've seen the appalling anti-Semitism in some of the protests in London. And it is not right that those protests are deliberately choosing routes that go via our Jewish communities or near our synagogues. And I look forward to legislation, which I know the government is considering, to restrict the ability of protests to intimidate our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would love to invite our friend from Greece up to the stage, Konstantinos Karakounis. Would you mind jumping in? Do you want to continue the tradition of the chair?
Back to the European way.
We love to have options here. Welcome, Mr. Karakounis. You're the Deputy Minister of Social Security and former Minister of Justice in Greece. So Greece's fight against extremism has shown that law and justice can make a real difference. How would you say anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism expressed in Greece today, and what lessons can other countries learn from your legal approach?
David, I think it's a very interesting question, because as you mentioned, of course, Greece has enforced its legal actions against extremist groups and Nazi political parties, unfortunately. As Deputy Minister of Justice, at the time of the passage of Greece's anti-racist law of 2014, I witnessed firsthand the importance of legal action in defending democracy against extremist forces. The anti-racist law provided a comprehensive framework to criminalize hate speech, incitement to violence, and discrimination. Each provisions, including the Holocaust denial clause, which criminalizes the public denial of trivialization of genocide, affirm that defending historical truth is essential to prevent the distortion of history that extremist ideologies rely upon. Upholding historical truth is not merely symbolic, it is a safeguard against the distortion of history that extremists often exploit. Greece's experience also illustrates that it is possible to uphold freedom of expression while protecting society from dangerous incitement, and that independent courts and prosecutors are critical in enforcing these protections. Let me add that the prosecution and imprisonment of members of Golden Dawn, a neo-Nazi political organization, demonstrated clearly that hate and violence cannot be tolerated. even under the guise on political legitimacy in a democracy, no one is above the law. In other words, what we have done in Greece is that we put them in jail and we thrown the keys. Greece has demonstrated that protecting democracy requires vigilance, not only against extremist actions, but also against attempts to infiltrate political institutions. By a specific law, we have passed before the elections of 2023, in a notable case of the second neo-Nazi party, is called Spartiates, the Electoral Court annulled the election and declaration of disputes and the replacement deputy in a specific, of deputies and the replacement deputy in a specific constituency because voters had been deceived into supporting a political party with a hidden leader who had already been convicted for organizing and directing a criminal organization. This decision highlights, David, that transparency of political leadership and legal oversight are essential to ensure that criminal or extremist actors cannot exploit democratic processes to gain political power. By enforcing these principles, Greece reinforced the message that the integrity of elections and public institutions must be safeguarded against manipulation by extremists or criminal, and of course, of Nazi networks.
Thank you so much. And finally, I also would like to, could you elaborate a little on education in the justice system? I mean, judges, prosecutors, police, what is the role in educating them to recognize contemporary anti-Semitism?
I think it's a matter of to see it in a general view, because, David, education and public awareness play a very fundamental role in preventing anti-Semitism over the long term. Legal measures alone, of course, cannot eliminate prejudice. They must be complemented by curricula that teach the history and lessons of the Holocaust, the dangers of hate and the value of human rights. Public campaigns, commemoration, and civic engagement initiatives help foster critical thinking, empathy, and respect for diversity, creating social norms that reject intolerance. By combining education with legal accountability, societies ensure that future generations understand the consequences of hatred and are equipped to resist extremist ideologies, making prevention of anti-Semitism a sustainable long-term endeavor. And David, let me share with you what policies we're initiating in Greece. As I said, professional development seminars are organized through European and international collaborations for educators, judges, lawyers, archivists, and librarians, and of course, for members of the police force. The Jewish Museum of Greece also operates an educational digital platform that provides lessons plans and classroom activities. These initiatives, including guided tours and school visits, aim to foster a positive and informed understanding of Jewish history and tradition in Greece, serving as an effective means of countering anti-Semitism. Of particular, and just finishing, of particular significance is the annual preparation and participation of judges, policemen, high school students in the creation of educational videos and visits to the Auschwitz Museum, an initiative that has taken place consistently since 2014. And of course, the Ministry of Education works in close cooperation with the Central Board of Jewish Communities in Greece on these matters, alongside with the Minister of Citizen Protection.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you.
You want to join us here? Of course. Yep. And with that, we move to our final panelist, Miss from the Netherlands, MEP Bert-Jan Roysen, please. Now everyone is very curious to see if you choose the podium, the chair, or maybe you want my space. Welcome, Bert-Jan, also my previous colleague from the European Parliament, member and vice chair of the delegation for relations with Israel. You have consistently defended Israel and the Jewish people in European debates. How is this growing blend of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism perceived in the Netherlands? And what do you think Europe still fails to understand about it?
Thank you very much, David. And it's a big honor to be here and to be your guest today. Indeed, what you said, I think in the debates in the European Parliament about Israel, about Gaza, I was, I think, quite vocal. One of the MEPs who are quite vocal. And I was so active in these debates, and that also has a main reason, I think, different reasons, but one of the reasons is that I see, to be honest, a direct link between, let's say, the disproportionate criticism on Israel and what is happening in the Middle East and the rising anti-Semitism in Europe. And I think, as earlier speakers already stressed, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two sides of the same coin. I think that's what we have to realize. And unfortunately, in the Netherlands, like in all other countries, I think in Europe, we see a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism also in the Netherlands was always there, but we saw a dramatic increase of anti-Semitism after the 7th of October. And like Lucas said, I'm really afraid that also after the ceasefire, you're gonna need wonder what can the ceasefire in Gaza, can that have a positive effect? Do we see already a decline of anti-Semitism? I'm afraid not, to be honest. Also in the Netherlands, let me give one recent example. The famous Dutch, what we call the Concertgebouw, the concert hall, recently announced that they will cancel a Hanukkah event in the hall because one of the singers has a connection with the Israeli army, IDF. That's a reason to cancel a Jewish event in the concert hall. It's a shame. It's a shame.
Disgrace.
And we have to say very clear, we cannot accept that, because by these kind of behaviors and attitudes, but we see a similar approach, a boycott approach. I call it the boycott approach. We see a similar boycott approach at the level of the universities that really stimulate, unfortunately, a very dramatic anti-Semitic environment in the whole society. So that means that also universities, governments, they have a big responsibility. We have to give a clear example to the society, and we have to, let's say, follow a zero tolerance policy related to anti-Semitism instead of accepting everything what happens.
Could I ask you, I mean, you often stress the moral roots and values of Europe. How can faith-based communities, Christian, Jewish, others, work together to push this back, this new form of anti-Semitism?
Yes, well, Christians and all, let's say, all other colleagues who are working based on faith or based on other faiths, it's really important to show for them that, well, from one side, we see there are differences between religious communities, but it's so crucial to respect each other as different communities. And we have the same background. We share the same values of respect. So it's an important responsibility, and I say that also as Christian politician, as an important responsibility for Christian politicians to show our solidarity with our Jewish community, because we realize the Jewish community is an integral, is a part, it's a really substantial part of our European history and culture.
Thank you so much. And we are running out of time, but I would like to ask you one one question to all of you. If you could answer in one sentence or two, even if it's hard, what would you say, if we start with you, Lucas, in the end, what is the single most important step at national or European level that could finally turn remembrance into responsibility, so never again will be a living reality? What would be the most important step for you to do next?
I think the understanding that the responsibility for anti-Semitism lies with the anti-Semites.
Yes.
Because we had discussions of various kinds in the public, in private spheres of all kinds over the months and years about who is responsible for that and for this. But it's an irrational conspiracy theory, ideology, extremely harmful, violent, leads to death, as we have heard several times today. And we know the historic example, but it's not only about history, it's about present times and the future, that we must not allow that to happen. And since we are also humble today and very decent.
Very long sentence.
One sentence, a long sentence with commas. I have to say to what Bert-Jan Ruijsen said, completely right. Politicians have to speak out. And since we're also decent, nobody said yet. I was really wondering about highest ranking politicians in Europe over the months and years before, which I never would see as anti-Semites, and that they are not anti-Semites. But did they consider what it can cause, how they spoke, the way they spoke, and the public statements they made? This remains for me something I'm really concerned about, and I make a full stop here.
Important words in a long sentence. Thank you so much. Konstantinos, please.
I think I would say the same thing, because the challenge of political courage for me is the greatest. Too often leaders remain silent in the face of anti-Semitic rhetoric. When it comes from within their own ranks, silence for me is complicity. We must reject anti-Semitism, whether it comes from the far right or the far left, or under the guise of activism, because we have this, of course, this picture. And for that reason, we have to build alliances. Fighting anti-Semitism is not the responsibility of Jewish communities alone. It is the duty of all people who believe in justice. And I think partnership among faith leaders, educators, activists, and policymakers can foster resilience against hate.
Thank you.
Tim? I agree with my colleagues. You won't be surprised to learn. And I would just say the first duty of any government is to protect its citizens, all of its citizens, not a particular community or 90% of the community, all its citizens. And that's why that leadership point is so important.
Thank you so much. Bert-Jan.
Education is important about the Holocaust, for example, but it's also a matter of enforcement. We have to follow a zero tolerance policy. And let's also not forget the threat of the radical Islam. So we have also to be very strict on our migration policy. That means, in my opinion, for example, when a newcomer do not respect the fact that we have a Jewish community and that the newcomer do not recognize the state of Israel, for such a newcomers, we have to say there's no place for you in Europe.
I would like to give a big thank you to everyone in the panel for being here with us today, and hope you stay for the rest. Thank you.
Thanks very much, all, for the interesting discussion. Thank you, David. There are some countries in Europe that are getting it more right than others. And one of those countries is Germany. And within Germany, there is one particular region called Hessen, which has got it very, very right indeed, in no small part due to the efforts of the vice chairman of the Jewish community of Gießen, which is located in Hessen, who's built up some wonderful contacts with the relevant offices down there when it comes to looking after Jews, identifying what anti-Semitism is, understanding what the problem is, where to look, And it's been, I was down there myself along with some other members of the EGA. It was just before Purim last year. It was absolutely fascinating and extremely refreshing to see how the Länder in Hessen are actually doing things. So without further ado, I shall hand over to the said Vice President of the Jewish community of Gießen, Mr. Lawrence de Jong Amis, who is going to share with you how they've done it. Thank you so much. Lawrence, please.
Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. Although I haven't got a clue who this wonderful person is he's just been talking about, we do try our very best in Germany in the fight of anti-Semitism. And without further ado, joining me today, and I'll have to read this off because the titles in English are even longer than they are in Germany. Joining me today is Dr. Walter Seubert, the president of the Hessian University for Public Management and Security from Wiesbaden, or as we could shortly call it, the Police Academy. Bernd Neumann, the president of the Hessian Office for the Protection of the Constitution, and our wonderful Annika Schleinzer, head of the Cross-Phenomenon Analysis Unit of Anti-Semitism and Xenophobia at the Hessian Office for the Protection of the Constitution. Would you please come and join me? Let me start with you, Walter. Where do you see the challenges today of training and educating young police officers to the sensibilities of the Jewish communities and especially the fight of the again rising anti-Semitism?
Lawrence, for me, anti-Semitism is a bridging ideology because it can be connected with all forms of extremism, right-wing, left-wing, religious extremism. Actually, we have in my university, we have 3,500 students. 2,000 of them want to become police officers. 1,500 want to work in the administration. And our mission is we have to be a bulwark for democracy and freedom against anti-Semitism and racism. So we want to strengthen the young people, their democracy resilience, and the whole part of attitude and values. What means this concrete? 5 points or 4 points are necessary for me. The first one, we have a very intensive cooperation with the Jewish community in Wiesbaden and Gießen. So the young police officers, they have to learn, they want to learn the Jewish traditions, and that is necessary for special trainings, which they have to do in the study of the 3 years. The second one, very concrete, in December, we have another cooperation with the educational department of the Central Circle of the Jews in Germany, and there's a special training against anti-Semitism. It's very important for us. The next one, the third one, political education. We have increased it in the last years. And we want to show the young people that they learn the competence and the ability to differentiate, and that there are no easy answers for difficult problems. And the last one, visiting memorials. We have a lot of memorials in Hesse and otherwise where they drive to, and it's very expensive. It's very important for us. So social media, another point, leads to a loss of social decency. And so because of that, we want to shape the young students to become good Democrats and to combat against anti-Semitism and racism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. Bernd, let me come to you. What has changed in Germany since the 7th. How has the perception of the Jewish communities from the public changed? What are you seeing?
Yeah, please, thank you for the invitation first. Yeah. It's a great honor for me and for my office to being here. Allow me to say, in the following from the video at the beginning, we must not forget. We must remember only those who know the past can shape the future. This is our responsibility for the future generations, day for day, week for week, month for month, and year for year. Following the barbaric attack, we launched a research project to examine the protest in Hessen State, and my colleague, Fleinzer Annika, will now report on this. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence, and thank you also to Mr. Alex Benjamin. I think that was the nicest introduction German can have, that someone says Germany, especially Hessen, does it right in the fight against anti-Semitism. It made me really happy to hear, and also the invitation today. Let me follow up on the question, what changed on the 7th of October? What happened at our workplace, the Office for the Protection of Constitutions, which is not the police. I don't know if everybody knows what it is. It's more like the German CIA in a small scale. But we're not the police, so we don't execute. We just view and research what is going on in the area of extremism. So the 7th of October was overwhelming. This is what I can say. The 7th of October, I started my new job on the 11th of October. So when I came, I have a research, my work area is research. So I knew from the beginning I wouldn't do research at all, but I would do prevention. I would visit the Jewish communities, and we were looking what is going on the streets. On the 8th of October, we had the first pro-Palestinian / anti-Israel protests in Hessen. And anti-Semitic rhetoric came from everywhere. Social media, hundreds, thousands of anti-Semitic comments to the 7th of October. We had the protests on the street we were watching, and we were seeing from the beginning on that we had extremists from all areas and from all different kinds that were coming together and joining in these protests. So just to follow up on what Mr. Neumann just said, after the first wave of hate slowed down a little bit, there was January, February 2024, we decided as LFV Hessen to start a research project, and we wanted to find out what is going on the streets. Who is it that is coming on the streets, and who is influencing these pro-Palestinian protests? And can I still talk? And I want to follow up on what Mr. Metzen just said. What we saw from the beginning on is we had a new rhetoric, a new anti-Semitic rhetoric that was coming up, and it has nothing to do with the anti-Semitism of the National Socialists or from neo-Nazis we saw before. It's a new coalition of leftists and Islamists that are coming together on the streets, and they join and find each other through a distinctive rhetoric. And I can elaborate on that later, but that is what we saw.
Thank you very much, Annika. We quite often in Germany get asked, how are we dealing with the AfD I know you've got a bit of headache at the moment because especially in Gießen, the first weekend of December, no, last weekend of November, the AfD youth organization that had been closed down and prohibited is refounding themselves. Where do you see the problems coming now, especially as we have noticed that the far right and the far left are coming full circle and combining?
Well, the AfD is a very difficult topic. Especially, there's a lot of research on anti-Semitic rhetoric in the AfD, but right-wing extremists like AfD, they're not coming together in this pro-Palestinian protests that we see. So this might be surprising, but right-wing extremists, they don't join in right now. And it is a huge danger for our democracy. But if we're talking about anti-Semitism, it's a different kind. We have some research from RIAS, which is a research initiative in Hessen that counts all anti-Semitic cases. And what we saw is most anti-Semitic cases are Israel-related anti-Semitism. And AfD is not going, AfD or other right-wing extremists, they're not going in this anti-Israel coalition. Their kind of anti-Semitism is different. But the rise in anti-Semitism in Hessen is especially a rise in left-wing and Islamist anti-Semitism, which is an anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. Ja. Wollen Sie vielleicht mal antworten? Okay. We don't see, if you mean like we're seeing an organization behind it, not directly, but what we're seeing is that leftists, for example, they take discourse and narrative from Hamas, for example. I don't know if you know, Hamas wrote a new manifesto in 2024 called Our Narrative. And this is exactly what we hear at universities, for example. Like leftists at universities and leftist extremists, which are at universities, which are at schools, and which dominate the protests, at least in Hessen, I don't know in other European countries, but they have the same rhetoric. So it's not exactly a Hamas funding. What I'm looking at is like the rhetorical and the narratives that come together and that bring together extremists from different wings. And they speak the same language now. But there's also a long historic tradition for the working together of leftists and Islamists. And we see they can connect and re-establish these connections that come in Germany from the late 60s, early 70s. And they build on a former coalition. So that is, in a way, interesting to see what is going on there.
Walter, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I want to add to other points which are typical for the state of Hesse. A few years ago, the state of Hesse founded a special program, Hesse Active Against Extremism and for Democracy. And the budget is more than 11 million euros. And they support projects in the cities, in special groups to strengthen educational of all groups in the state of Hesse. 11 million euros in the last years. I think it's very good. The second part, there's been founded a portal, Hesse Against Hate Speech. And for me, hate speech is perhaps a sister of anti-Semitism. And the last year, there were 85,000 reportings for this portal, and 47% have been sent to the institutional bodies in police and justice. So each person in Germany can send a message to this portal, and then they will prove it, look on the report, and send it to Police and Justice. 85,000 reports in the last years. It's very much.
I know we did an event a couple of days together while you were speaking. We did a big event in summer at the Hessentag, and as you were showing in your PowerPoint, it is absolutely frightening how far the anti-Semitic incidents have gone up. And I've just noticed you wanted to add something, so please go ahead.
I just wanted to, I was thinking about the question from you. If there's someone in the back like structuring and influencing the protests, it's not that big organization, but what is interesting, what we see is that extremists we knew from before, they're getting into this pro-Palestinian protests, and they're bringing their own ideology into these protests. So people that have their right to go on the streets and have sympathy for the Palestinian cause, this is their given right. But influence from extremists into these protests brings them to a different direction. So it is indeed a kind of manipulation behind it. And what we saw, and what I saw in my research already for the first 3 months from October till December 2023, more than a third of all the pro-Palestinian protests that we had in Hessen were influenced, mobilized for, organized, angemeldet, fällt mir jetzt gar nicht ein, organized and so on from known extremists, extremists that we already had on the screen. And they were there as speakers and motivators, so they had a big impact. They were reactivated, yeah. Yeah, in a kind of like that. For example, we had seen a lot of leftist groups at the universities. They had like 3 to 5 members. They were like not interesting anymore. And suddenly they were reactivated at the universities. They come up again. And they were joined with the pro-Palestinian cause by a lot of students that had nothing to do with extremism before.
We've just had the pesky sign. We've got 5 minutes. Now, we've been working together for quite a few years very closely. There's a friendship there which helps a lot. But where are we still lacking? Where do we need to go? Maybe to you, Bernd. Where do we need to make much more effort?
Okay. Please translate for me. Yes. Okay. I think we must invest more in education, much more. In the school, it's not enough. Yeah. I think, second, we need more of zero tolerance. Yes. A little thing, kleiner Spalt, ist zu viel. Ja, wir müssen hier tatsächlich klare Kante zeigen.
So we need to be very clear and say this is as far as it goes and not a millimeter further. But the question is, how do we achieve that? How do you see it, Walter?
I think we need many small steps, and many small steps in the result is a big step. So we try to go small steps in my university, and the German community has a responsibility to fight against anti-Semitism in the whole parts of the community.
Annika.
I think we need to learn the anti-Semitic language of extremists. We need to learn what Israel-related anti-Semitism is and how these groups how they talk about Jews and how they bring their anti-Semitic stereotypes forward. Anti-Semitism changed in its appearance, and from what I see in my prevention in schools, people don't understand what's going on. They think, like we said before, they think we're talking about Zionists. No, we're talking about Jews in the end. They don't know what a Zionist is. It's just a different word. And last sentence, what I saw in my studies that is that from 7th of October on, we had new narratives like resistance, genocide. Israel hadn't even started the war against the Hamas when they were talking already about resistance and genocide. So this is the new language, and we need to educate about this new anti-Semitic language.
Maybe one last controversial question, and maybe we can make it short, the answer. Should we, can we control social media? I know, I've just opened up a very big topic.
Yes, yes. It's not easy. Social media is out of control. We see it in all kinds of extremism. Right extremism. I think social media is besetzt.
It's being used by?
It's being used by first. And the agenda from right extremism is first at social media. And they are very professional. And I think we must Altersbeschränkung.
You have an age restriction.
Yes. First. And second, Medienkompetenz.
Media competence, I agree. Annika, maybe one short sentence to the topic. I know it's difficult.
No, you can't control social media, and I would suggest to go into the real life and have longer discussions and really go deeper into it with young people to learn about what anti-Semitism looks like and what it is.
Walter.
I think it's very difficult to find the right balance between hate speech, hate crime, and the freedom of speech. And so we have, what Bernd has said, to learn the competence and the ability to differentiate, and we have to increase political education.
Annika, Bernd, Walter, thank you very much for that. I know we had very little time for the big topic, but I'm very sure that you will answer questions for delegates later. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very, very much indeed. And thank you as well, Lawrence. Your trains might not run on time, but it seems German efficiency is still very good when it comes to running a panel. Thank you very, very much. And Annika, just to say that I really, really meant it. The work that's going on in Hessen really is quite outstanding. So congratulations to all concerned. Now, from Germany, crossing to the other side of the Atlantic, to introduce our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call upon my esteemed colleague, Mrs. Ruth Wasserman Lande, who is our Senior Advisor for International Affairs here at the EGA, but that would be selling her somewhat short. She was also a member of the Knesset for Blue and White, a seasoned diplomat with postings in Cairo, a senior advisor to the former president of Israel, the sorely missed Shimon Peres. And with that, I'll invite my dear colleague up to handle the next discussion. Ruth, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you so much for taking of your time to address this very important issue and topic with a true and sincere heart. Our next guest, ladies and gentlemen, is a leading CEO in one of the largest IT consultancy firms in the United States, Genesis 10. He has been appointed to serve repeatedly by US presidents as a board member of the US Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, both on the left and the right, all presidents. In his role, he led efforts to uncover mass graves across Poland of Jews murdered by the Germans. He is also a leading voice in Jewish America, as well as being a very generous philanthropist to a number of causes worldwide. We are also incredibly grateful that he serves as our very own international relations expert and commentator at the EJA. Please, it is my great pleasure to invite Mr. Hurley Lipman to come to the stage.
Well, thank you. Good to see you all here. Feels really good to look out at people who care about things greater than themselves, who are worried about hatred, intolerance, the survival of Jewish people, in particular anti-Semitism. So I'm very grateful that you're all doing what you're doing to fight this terrible scourge that we're experiencing worldwide. Yes. Yes. Now?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a great pleasure to have you with us. You come all the way from America. When you view, sir, the anti-Semitism, the surging anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism on the European continent, what are your thoughts? It would be interesting because of the perspective you have from across the Atlantic. Just a few thoughts from your part to begin with, please.
Well, American Jews are also victims of anti-Semitism, but the difference between European Jews and American Jews is that American Jews are organized, American Jews have money, and American Jews have power, and they're using it. We are using it. America has an organization called AIPAC, which stands for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, for example, which is a very potent, powerful political arm that supports a strong America-Israel relationship. To the best of my knowledge, Europe has nothing like that. Also, America has increasingly stronger laws to fight anti-Semitism. As much as America has its struggles with anti-Semitism, and it's getting worse, whether you like President Trump or don't like President Trump, he is doing more to fight anti-Semitism than any president I could think of. And perhaps the best example is the universities. He has gone to war with the most radical American universities to make them stop being anti-Semitic. That is extraordinary.
Absolutely, and you've been instrumental in that, sir, being on the boards of several of the Ivy League universities, and you would know very much what a war he has indeed waged on the anti-Semitism on campuses. But allow me, please, with your permission, to ask about the infiltration of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, Islamism, and extremism in general into very many echelons of society. For example, soccer clubs, professional unions, political circles, both on the right and on the left. And that's in America. Of course, in Europe, this is prevalent as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that particular infiltration from the legal point of view, from the combating anti-Semitism point of view, and so on?
Well, there's a convergence of forces going on in America and in Europe. One led by the Muslim Brotherhood, financed by Iran, in particular Qatar, Turkey, and abetted by Russia, which is trying to infiltrate all areas of the United States in ways that are hostile to Jews and are viciously anti-Semitic, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. They have thousands of charities where they're trying to gain huge influence, and they're doing it successfully. There's a law now, or a bill that's up for voting, whether they should be designated a terrorist organization. Then you have on the extreme left, the woke, as we call them, that have dominated universities. I'm on the board of 2 American Ivy League universities. And a conservative, I asked both boards openly, would a conservative get tenure? Tenure means you're kind of set for life. That's what all professors try to obtain. And the answers at both major American Ivy League universities was basically a no, which is shocking. Only 3% of the faculty of the Ivy League universities identify themselves as conservative or Republican. And I raised this question because America is about 50-50, half a Democrats, half a Republican. So you have that element, money from Qatar, the leftists that have an overly simplistic view of either you're the oppressed or you're an oppressor. I saw in one of the videos here, I can't remember it now because it's so horrific. Oh, rape is resistance. Rape is resistance. I don't think I've ever seen that in history. So and I want to dovetail to genocide, if I may, because this is the plague that we're now experiencing. This is the equivalent of what our ancestors experienced during the bubonic plague, when Europeans blamed Jews, to the killing of Jesus Christ, to taking blood from Christian children. Those are the 3 main blames in history that Jews experienced. Now we have the 4th genocide. Now, I want to just take a quick moment, if I may, to explain when I've heard speakers say we have to combat it, but we're not giving the reasons to prove why it's not genocide. If it is genocide, then we need to own it and talk about it. But it's not genocide, and here's why. Number one, less than 1% of the Palestinian population of Gaza has been killed in this war. We know at the start of the war that the population was approximately 2.4 million. Then the other statistic is from the Gaza Health Ministry. They're controlled by Hamas. Their strategy is to exploit their own people, have as many Palestinians die as possible. So this is their weapon against Israel, which they've been highly effective at. They've won the propaganda war, the public relations war. So this is another a big element. And then you have, when you think of genocide, let's drill down now. So the Gaza Health Ministry says 68,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's their number. You know, it's exaggerated, it's not true. But let's believe them for a minute. And let's believe Israel, that says a little more than half are Hamas terrorists and their supporters. That leaves less than 30,000. It's a tragedy. It's terrible. Those are innocent people. It's not genocide. It's less than 1%. Genocide is what happened on October 7th when they took my friend Ovid, 84 years old, from a kibbutz, who is a peace activist who would go to Gaza to take Palestinians to Israel to be treated for free. He tried to explain who he was. He was beaten up, dragged to Gaza, tortured and murdered, 84 years old. The raping of women, that's genocide.
It's tragic, it's terrible, and if we even look at statistics from the Second World War, if I'm not mistaken, approximately 60,000 were killed in a single bombing of Dresden. So the numbers can speak for themselves. So thank you for pointing that out. I do have a last question for you, which may be a little bit different. Of course, there's an infiltration of foreign powers into European institutions as well as American institutions. We all know that they promote a different ideology, an extremist Islamist ideology, and one of the waves that they are riding is the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism wave. What would you propose to do? Should we follow the money? Should we legislate against foreign intervention? How? May that be the bridging bond between Europe and the US in fighting extremism in general and anti-Semitism in particular?
Well, all the above, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of speeches, a lot of talk. If you want to get to the bottom of it, to really begin to address and end anti-Semitism, you have to have regime change in Iran. Iran is the #1 Holocaust denier in the world. They're the center of Holocaust deniability. They, with Qatar, are funding this. This is where it's coming from. The war that we just recently witnessed in Gaza over 2 years could not have happened without the support of Iran. So you have to get to the root of the problem. It's like Nazi Germany in the 1930s. There's no legislation. There's no discussion. You could not have Nazi Germany survive and have Jews continue to live. It's incompatible. It's the same thing with Iran. But Europe has this, what I'll call appeasement mentality. Things don't change. They were appeasers in the 1930s. And largely they're appeasers now, as the leaders of many European nations called for recognition of a Palestine. But what would it look like? With what borders? What government? Would it be de-radicalized? Would it be demilitarized? None of that is addressed. And when they said that, they didn't even put a condition to it, like first release the hostages. Think what that tells you.
Well, I think, unfortunately, we have to end this very, very interesting conversation. However, perhaps if there is more of an understanding amidst the Europeans that this kind of extremism is not only against the Jews, this is just the first sort of sign of the antagonism, the extremism, the rotting of a society from within the entire society, and not just the Jewish part of it.
Well, on that note, as you may have heard, it always starts with the Jews.
It never ends with the Jews.
Jews are the canary in the coal mine.
Exactly. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lippman. Thank you, Ruth. Now, I mentioned earlier on that there are some countries in Europe that are doing it right. And in my opinion, top of the class would go to Hungary right now in terms of how it is treating, how it nourishes, how it cherishes its Jewish community. So to introduce our next special guest, it's my great pleasure to call upon a dear friend of ours at the EGA, who is the director of the Action and Protection League, Mr. Kalman Salai, who drove all the way from Budapest to be with us, who is going to introduce our next speaker. Kalman, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Alex. Dear guest, I just come up on stage for a brief moment. It is my privilege to introduce you our new guest, a person who's committed to politics, whose deep and heartfelt dedication to the real fight against anti-Semitism I have rarely seen matched. In his everyday work, he served as a Hungary's minister for European affairs. And we all know this is not an easy job nowadays in Hungary. At the same time, he also acts as a government coordinator for combating anti-Semitism. The fact that he oversees both of those two fields demonstrate the seriousness and watching the European procedures, the connection of these two issues as well. Moreover, he's deeply engaged in supporting the Jewish life in Hungary and in handling all kind of Jewish-related issue at the governmental level. Please give a warm welcome and a big round of applause to János Bóka, Hungary's Minister for EU Affairs, whose journey began in the Bnei Akiva and has led him to the ministerial position till now.
Your Excellencies, dear friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Europe is once again battling with demons that we thought were defeated for good, and we thought it inconceivable that they return. Anti-Semitism is rising in almost every corner of Europe. And this time it is not only a cyclical phenomenon, a temporary upward trend to be followed in due course by a downward correction. This time is different. Probably all of us in this room feel it. But we don't have to rely on our feelings or anecdotal evidence. We have the numbers, we have the statistics, the national security assessments, political context, semantic and linguistic analysis. So we actually know. For us, politicians, the question is how we interpret this knowledge and what we intend to do with it. We might never know who invented the concept of anti-Semitism, when, where, and why, but it is beyond doubt that Europe has done more than its share of reinventing and reframing the idea through the centuries. Jews were hated because they were not pagans, then because they were not Christians. Except for those who converted. They were, of course, hated because they became Christians. Jews were hated because they were capitalists. Except for those who were not. They were hated because they were communists. And those who were clearly not communists could still be hated because they were liberals or conservatives or social democrats. Jews were hated because they were considered unable or unwilling to integrate or assimilate, except for those who did, because they were hated for exactly the opposite reason. Jews were hated because they became Zionists and embarked on the heroic task of re-establishing their own state in the land of Israel, except, of course, for those who did not. They were hated because they decided to stay in Europe as loyal nationals of their home country, despite the atrocities suffered in the past. And I could go on for hours. So at the end of the day, anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews because the simple fact that they are Jews. And this characteristic has not changed from the very beginning. What has changed, however, is the vocabulary, symbolism, and ideology behind the most powerful new strands of anti-Semitism, as well as its representatives, carriers, and supporters. One such strand is heavily influenced by different versions of radical Islamism that are the direct or indirect byproducts of the demographic changes happening in Europe because of mass and largely uncontrolled migration. Another strand has grown out of the different movements of radical left-wing activists who apparently got bored of fighting climate change, but unfortunately never get tired of dividing humanity into the simplistic categories of oppressors and oppressed, and by recycling the old leftist anti-Semitic cliches, now came to identify the Jews as the oppressors. The two strands are not simply coexisting. They are intertwined in a very strange way. Of course, they are worlds apart when it comes to the shape of the ideal society they are trying to achieve. Yet, they very much agree that our Western civilization, based among others on the pillars of Judeo-Christian tradition, must be eradicated and replaced by something else. In this sense, their political fight is civilizational. They use Israel and the Jews as a pretext, and they rightly identify the Jewish communities in Europe as one of the cornerstones of our European heritage. Without them, Europe would cease to be Europe and would become something else. Indeed, this is a battle for the soul of Europe. A superficial look at the symbolism and vocabulary of these movements might lead you to the premature conclusion that the discourse is not about Jews. It is about Israel, Israelis, or Zionists. Consequently, this is not anti-Semitism, but a strong yet legitimate criticism of the policies of the State of Israel. But don't be fooled. Most of the time, this is just plain old anti-Semitism, and everybody knows it. You don't have to be an expert to understand that music performers running around the stage with a Hezbollah flag on their shoulders and shouting up Hamas and up Hezbollah are doing something totally different from the legitimate criticism of Israel. Also, when I was in Antwerp a few weeks ago and saw signs painting on the walls of synagogues saying child murderer Jews, I could not decipher any subtle differentiation between the State of Israel and Jews in general. Or when you hear from the river to the sea, you easily get the message that in this political universe, there is no place for the State of Israel. But if you actually want to become an expert in separating anti-Semitism from the legitimate criticism of the State of Israel, there are a number of tested tools to turn to. Take the 3 Ds of Natan Sharansky: delegitimization, demonization, and double standards, or the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. They all point to the same conclusion. The vast majority of public speech that now centers on Israel or the Middle East and is presented as anti-Zionism or anti-Israeli criticism is just thinly veiled anti-Semitism. Another thing that has changed in the past few years is that anti-Semitism has become political, in the sense that it has entered some of the key political structures, and there it has become tolerated, even normal. We can see it in the statements of mainstream politicians, some of them even in government positions, in media outlets that were considered respectable, as well as universities and research institutions. A new ritual has now emerged where intellectuals, especially those from Israel or of Jewish ancestry, are expected to make public statements denouncing Israel to avoid isolation or being cancelled. They need to prove that they are the good Jews as opposed to the bad Jews. So anti-Semitism is no longer just an intellectual challenge or a matter for social research. It is now hardcore politics. And we haven't seen anything like this in Europe since the 1940s. The fight against anti-Semitism must adapt to the new environment. This is the first lesson we must learn. We are not winning in Europe. We are losing ground every day, and at some point this process will become irreversible. Business as usual is clearly not a satisfactory approach anymore. In this context, I offer you a few ideas that I believe can work. First, let us all recognize that the fight against anti-Semitism is a political exercise. We need political ownership and commitment on the highest level to support our activities. All our governments must declare a zero-tolerance policy against anti-Semitism and appoint a high-level political envoy to coordinate the fight against anti-Semitism. The personal and political cost of anti-Semitism must be dramatically increased and its benefits dramatically reduced. Political anti-Semitism must have consequences and not only rhetoric consequences. This will not be possible without controversies and pushbacks, and we must be prepared to face them because it is no longer an option to please everyone. Second, let us all recognize that we are facing a European challenge that requires European answers. The tendencies are very similar all over the continent, and they know no borders. No government can fight online hate speech alone. Free movement of persons in the Schengen area might be abused by individuals with bad intentions. Free movement of capital means easy financing for shady objectives. During the Hungarian presidency, the Council of the European Union unanimously adopted a declaration on fostering Jewish life and fighting anti-Semitism in the European Union. This declaration was not intended to remain a PR exercise. It was intended to be implemented. I also believe that it is high time for the Commission to review and reinforce its strategy to fight anti-Semitism and back it up with more funding for dedicated projects. I also believe that the Commission could and should do more to ensure that no EU funding is channeled to institutions or NGOs inciting or condoning anti-Semitism inside or outside the EU. Third, let us build on the principle that the best way to fight anti-Semitism is to foster Jewish life in Europe and build bridges between Jewish and non-Jewish communities. You can only fight darkness with light. You can only defeat death through life. Governments must guarantee the security of our Jewish communities, must help them becoming more resilient, and must support them in fostering Jewish life in all its diversity throughout Europe. But then again, these grand objectives must be translated into very basic tasks. If Jewish communities are not allowed to perform circumcision according to their ancient customs, then how serious are we about fostering Jewish life? If member states can ban the kosher slaughtering of animals, then how serious are we about fostering Jewish life? Building bridges between Jewish and non-Jewish communities requires safe spaces where such encounters can actually take place. By definition, schools and universities should remain such places. But looking at the dramatically deteriorating situation of campus anti-Semitism in Europe, one cannot avoid the question: how serious are we about building bridges between communities and individuals if Jews cannot consider universities in many parts of Europe safe places anymore? How do we expect Jewish kids to attend public schools if they cannot use public transportation anymore without the risk of being harassed? Again, we do not lack tools at our disposal. Just an example, nothing would prohibit banning students who are involved in anti-Semitic incidents from the Erasmus program, for example. And finally, let us recognize that no credible policy of fighting anti-Semitism may exist without a strategic partnership with the State of Israel based on mutual respect and constructive engagement. Besides being generally counterproductive in our bilateral relations, the language of sanctions and isolation also erodes the political trust of the European Jewish communities in our efforts to fight anti-Semitism. The Jewish communities in Europe perfectly understand that double standards and delegitimization against the State of Israel will eventually have a spillover effect on them. So should we. There are quite a few members of Jewish communities around Europe who believed that there is no future for Jews in Europe anymore. Life is getting more and more difficult, in some places almost unbearable. Some say the process has now become irreversible because of the cruel laws of demography, statistics, and political convenience. I disagree. The soul of Europe is not lost yet, and we must fight for it with determination. My government considers this a priority and is ready to contribute and work with all like-minded governments and partners. We owe this to ourselves, and we owe this to Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for the support of your government, and thank you for everything that you do and for your words. Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to our next panel, a difficult one. As you've heard throughout this symposium, increasing unchecked hate on our streets, poisonous discourse on social media, Jews being attacked, kicked, the horrible words of Rabbi Margolin about the need that we're thinking about self-defense and tasers. It all came to a head on Yom Kippur, our holiest day of the year, when our worst fears became a reality as a Syrian-born UK citizen turned terrorist sought to kill as many Jews as possible at Heaton Park Synagogue. 2 were killed. Now, it could have been much, much worse if it hadn't have been for heroes like Rabbi Daniel Walker, who, along with others, barricaded the doors, whose blood-spattered kittel that you can see on the screen was a deeply, deeply upsetting and traumatic sight for Jews to see. For our next panel, I would like to invite Rabbi Daniel Walker, our special guest speaker, Mr. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Rabbi Menachem Margolin, the chairman of the EGA, to join me on stage, please. Before we start the panel, it's time to reflect a moment on the lives lost. We remember Mr. Melvin Kravitz and Mr. Adrian Dolby. May their memory be for a blessing. I now invite Rabbi Walker, Mr. Boris Johnson, and Rabbi Margolin to each light a memorial candle, please. Please join me as we take a minute of silence. Thank you. I now invite Rabbi Walker to recite the Kaddish. Thank you, Rabbi.
Iskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbo v'yomod divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei v'yatzmach polkonei v'korev meshichei v'chayechain uv'yemechain uv'chay d'chol beis Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman korev v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbo mevorach l'olam lo me'omaya yisborach v'yishtabach v'yispoa v'yisraimon v'yisnasei V'yishada v'yis'ale v'yishalal shmei d'kodesha brichu leila min kol brachasa v'shirasa tushbachasa v'nechemasa ta'amiron b'yolma v'imru amen. Yehi shloma rabba min shemai v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Ayse shalom b'mrayma v'yase shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Walker. Please be seated, everyone, and we'll get the panel underway. Rav Margolin at the last chair, I beg your pardon, Mr. Johnson in the middle, and Rav Walker beside me. Thank you so much, and I'll move over here to the microphones. Rav Margolin, in November last year on this stage, you called for the EU to bring in a six-month period of emergency. Can you talk us through why you needed to make that call and what you wanted to see happen?
First of all, I think that it is a sorry that I had to call for an emergency period to be declared by the European governments. And actually, I wish it would never be needed. And two, if it is already needed, governments will understand it. The fact that we had to call for it means that government did not really understand what is really the situation in Europe. The level of anti-Semitism in Europe continued to break its record every single day. And all those marches of hatred, the demonstrations, Jews being murdered and attacked on a daily basis, we understood that something had to be different. So we asked government for something which is very simple. First of all, they have to understand that sometimes silence for anti-Semites means permission. And the fact that anti-Semites wanted to express their hatred and government said nothing were interpreted by them as a permission to do what they wanted to do. And what we asked was actually very simple. We wanted government to declare 6 months of emergency so they will understand that during 6 months, they have to increase much more security around Jewish institutions. They have to have pre-authorization procedure for all those demonstrations with a clear code of conduct, a strict code of conduct of language of what can, what cannot be said during those demonstrations. And very clearly, what we wanted to see is a fast track, if we can call it, legal procedure for those that commit crimes. Because what we see today is that there are so many anti-Semites who commit so many crimes. People do not even go to the police anymore because they lost the trust that anything will be developed. Even if one day, after a couple of years, somebody will be found guilty, it will be already an old story that no one will be interested in. So we did ask for a fast-track legal procedure for anti-Semitic crimes.
Thanks, Rav. Rabbi Walker, thank you for being thank you so much for being with us. I know it's a difficult time for you. I also know you're busy dealing with the current government inquiry into the Heaton Park synagogue attack, where you serve as a rabbi. British Jews, Manchester Jews, the Jews at your synagogue. I know it might be a bit of a difficult question to ask, but were you worried that something like this might happen?
It is a difficult question because I'm a very optimistic person. So to be honest, I didn't really think something like this could happen. But on the other hand, the reason why we were, and many lives were saved that day, was because of the security infrastructure, because of the procedures in place. And the truth is, we had all that in place because we were worried it was going to happen. I think we're all saying we were shocked, but we weren't surprised. We live behind gates. Our kids' schools are behind gates. The security guards everywhere. I personally have security guards at the moment. Because, yeah, we are worried, and we were worried, tragically.
Tragically indeed. And it's something that we've heard time and time again so far during this symposium, that more and more Jews are behind fences, behind barricades, behind armed protection, and yet still it's not enough. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for being with us. You've been on the record, sir, as saying that the current government has been struggling with their position on the marches and Israel. Can you expand on this a bit more? And tricky question, but if you were still Prime Minister, what would you have done differently?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the honor of inviting me to your very important proceedings. I think the problem fundamentally is that anti-Semitism, as Rabbi Margolin has just said, and Rabbi Walker also, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks have been on the rise, and they are evil and they must be quashed. And I think one of the mistakes that politicians have been making is to allow a certain sort of moral equivalence to creep in between, looking at the issues in the Middle East, between Israel and Gaza and Hamas. And quite frankly, if you ask me what I would have done differently, well, when I was running London, we didn't allow on the streets of London, as a doctrine, we didn't allow international disputes or the politics of tense global issues to import themselves onto our streets and to create division and fear. And it was very important that we didn't allow that. I think that when I look at the handling, the government's handling of the issue, you know, I back to my point. A false equivalence has been allowed to take root between Hamas and Israel. It's absolute nonsense. And you know, the UK began by saying we stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel, and you know, then we went on to do things like, you know, Israel's one of our most important allies, and we've been at a time of critical need in Israel. The Labour government banned some arms sales, and then I think prematurely and unnecessarily decided to offer recognition to Palestine, which, you know, doesn't deliver anything for the people of Palestine. It achieves absolutely zero, except pointlessly to throw away an important UK European negotiating card if and when we were able to get a real deal. So that's the thing I regret. Those are some of the things that I would not have done. I think you've just got to be clear. You've got to maintain moral clarity about what happened, about the threat that Israel faces, and about the tragic reality of the rise in anti-Semitism. You need to quash it.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. Rabbi Walker, coming back to you, sir. Going forwards, what needs to be done to make Jews feel safe again? I mean, I read, before you answer that question, very briefly, I read something this morning which struck with me, something that you said in an interview, I believe it was with the Daily Telegraph. And when you said, look, what you really wanted to do was, it hurt you personally that the synagogue was shut for a couple of days. And you really, really wanted to get back. And you wanted to dance all the harder on Simchat Torah. And that really struck me, that there is that resilience within the Jewish community, but there's still that underlying sense of we don't feel safe. So what do you think could be done to mitigate that, to make Jews just feel safe again, if we ever did feel safe?
I think we have to be made to feel safer than we have been until now. Absolutely. I believe that we have to get back into Jewish life. We did. The truth is we were surrounded by, well, the police force was immensely supportive, CSD, we were made to feel safe. But the truth is that isn't a sustainable response in the long term. There has to be some tackling of the sources of this. Someone didn't wake up one morning and decide to go and attack my synagogue and kill my friends, ruin my friends. He was born in an atmosphere of hate, and we have to find ways of challenging that. And undoubtedly, one of the things I think we have to, sorry, I'm going on a bit. We have to acknowledge that the roots of that hate is definitely in the demonization of Israel. When our attacker stood on the steps and I was looking at him through the window, he shouted, "These are killing our kids." And the first thing that occurred to me was the ridiculousness of suggesting that two of the nicest people you're ever going to meet, Loving Kravitz and Adrian Dolby, would ever harm a fly. They never killed anyone's kids. They're the most loveliest, wonderful people. But it's the end of the sentence as well, this accusation, which is really on every Jew in the world, that we are all somehow collectively killing kids. And it comes from the language of genocide, the language of condemnation. I received a death threat a few months ago. Someone left a message on my machine telling me to get out of Manchester. They don't like my types around here. I support genocide. I laughed it off. I'm not laughing anymore. We have to challenge that hatred. We have to challenge that language. We have to find ways to make political points in a reasonable way without inserting hate and discrimination into the conversation. Until we do that, we're not going to feel safe.
Thank you, Rabbi Walker. Mr. Johnson, talking about feeling safe, Rabbi Margolin said in his opening remarks this morning that if governments won't protect Jews, Jews are asking about ways that they should be protecting themselves, potentially with defensive weapons like the taser, pepper spray. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's tragic that it's come to this. And again, when I think back just over my time in politics, think back to my time running London, things are appreciably more tense, more difficult for the Jewish community. And I understand what motivates Rabbi Margolin to say that. Obviously, as somebody who believes in the rule of law and so on, I can't remember whether tasers are legal for members of the public. I don't know. I'm not certain that they are. I'm not certain that pepper spray is either. So I couldn't, in all conscience, advocate that people went around carrying equipment that was not legal. This should be what the police are doing. The CST community has done an amazing job. But Rabbi Walker is an amazingly brave man, but he should not have been required to show such bravery in his own synagogue. And So yes, I think we need a tougher law and order response. We need to stop. We need more stop and search generally. I mean, people should not go around carrying knives on the streets of the UK. We should have more stop and search. But really, I think I agree with Rabbi Walker. We have to deal with the root causes of this, which is the legitimation of anti-Semitic expression and feeling by political dialogue, by the I'm afraid by the coverage of events in the Middle East, by the BBC. The way it's constantly presented, the churn, is eating away at people's understanding of this and correct understanding of it. And so, that's the thing I think really needs to. People are getting, I'm afraid, their minds are being polluted by the appalling misinformation, prejudice, and you can't fight the security issues without dealing with that as the primary problem.
Thank you. Rav Margolin, look, zooming out a bit from the Manchester case and from the UK, and if we were looking ahead, if things carry on as they are in Europe today, if things continue as they are down the current path, what do you see happening to European Jewry? What do you think European Jewry will look like in the years ahead if things stay like this?
Oh, my kids, I'm blessed with 6 kids. They were born in Belgium. I was born in Israel. My father was born in Belarus. His father was born in Lithuania. His father was born in Poland. And his father was born in Russia. Unfortunately, this is the story of almost every Jewish family, that every generation lives in another country. There's no doubt that people will feel that they cannot live safe, will move. I know that many Jewish people already in the last years, even during wartime, moved to war zone in Israel, and many others considering leaving Europe. It will be, of course, a tragedy for Europe if it happens. But I believe that the visible Jews will be the first to disappear. Then those that right now either are not visible or things that can continue to hide the Jewishness. And if nothing changed, then indeed we will see Jewish population living in another country. I think it will be a tragedy for Europe. I really do not want to see it happening. I do have trust in Europe. I have trust in the values. Jews lived in Europe for millennia. And I think that not only the people that are here in this room, but everyone have to insist and demand from the governments to do what they can. There's no doubt, and we have a prime minister with us, he can confirm. If a prime minister wants something, he do have many possibilities to achieve it. If governments in Europe would be really willing to defeat anti-Semitism, they could reduce a lot of the hatred, and I really wish it's going to happen.
Thanks, thanks, Rabbi. So I'll more or less put your point directly to former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, anti-Semitism has been a hot button topic in British Parliament for many years. Of course, you remember the loathsome Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. Well, quite. Inquiries, debates, many questions. Given all of this discussion, given all of these discussions that were going on within the UK, how can the lack of preparedness for the response that Rav Walker and Rabbi Margolin were just talking about, how can that be explained? I mean, it's not like it's come out of a blue, and yet it seems to have come out of a blue. So would love your thoughts on that, Mr. Johnson.
I think that people have been genuinely shocked by the reemergence of anti-Semitism on the streets of our cities. And you're right, you put it very well. It's come out of the blue, but not come out of the blue. This is something that's been around for hundreds of years, longer. It's an ancient curse. of humanity. So, you know, we're aware of the potential for this to happen, but it wasn't happening. You know, I don't want to sound starry-eyed about London in, you know, when I was running it, but, you know, it didn't feel like that. I mean, and we were, you know, actually at the time, you talk about the movements of talented Jewish people across Europe, a lot of people were coming to London. And actually, I think, as far as I can remember, they were coming from France and other countries. And so that's a great thing for a city. It's a wonderful thing. And I think politicians need to recognize that. You ask what we should do.
Right.
Just recognize the blessing it is to have a community of, you know, brilliant people who are going to add massively to the attractiveness of life in your city, and talk it up. That's what they should be doing, and make them feel safe. Make everybody feel safe. You know, right now London is going through a tough time because of a law and order problem. That is easily fixed. If you give the police the power to stop and search, and you say you'll back the police, you will fix street crime. Right. If you tell them that you won't tolerate abuse of Jewish people or anybody else, they will do it, and you can fix these things. So I think politicians need to realize quite what is at stake. You know, my own country, you're seeing quite a big exodus now, I'm sad to say, of all types of people, and that needs to stop.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I can only concur what you just said. I mean, I have family in London, and I went back to London very shortly after the October 7th attacks. I was born and bred in London, and I remember coming back to Brussels and saying to myself, it's not my city anymore. I just didn't recognize it. I walked along Piccadilly, and every second person was wearing a keffiyeh, Palestinian flags everywhere, and I was like, what on earth has happened to London? So I can only concur with what you said. I'm going to give the last word for this panel to Rabbi Walker. Once again, thank you for taking the time out, for being with us. Do you think anti-Semitism in the UK has been treated with the seriousness it deserves? Now, and I know that that might seem a bit myopic, just focusing on the UK, but you've heard what Rabbi Margolin was saying about Europe as a whole. So I know you live in the UK, but you're obviously aware of what's happening in Europe. So let me just broaden it out, not only in the UK, but also, do you think, from what you've seen so far, that anti-Semitism is seriously in Europe?
I think it's a really hard question. I think a lot of people would like to think that they take it seriously, but our lived experience is that it hasn't been taken seriously enough. It sometimes feels to me as if it's the only racism which is okay. When you have people being broadcast at shows, screaming the most vicious chants, that doesn't feel to me like anyone's taking it seriously. People make complaints against excuse me, medics in the NHS, and there's no sanction. That doesn't feel like it's taking it very seriously. I've got one little girl at home at the moment, and last week I was looking at the coverage, and she's really reading the newspaper, and she's really quite traumatized, and she said to me that, you know, why won't I stop reading the paper? And I said, well, I want to know what's going on. And she basically said she wants to stop being reminded of it. She wants things to go back to normal. She wants her life back. To be honest, the normal, which is her normal, isn't good enough either. I don't want my daughter to have to go to school behind big gates and with guards outside. It's not okay. She might be used to it, but I refuse to get used to it. And so, no, it hasn't been taken seriously enough. And if anything good can happen from this, maybe there'll be a watershed moment and it will start being taken seriously in the UK and in Europe as a whole. So my children can live in a better world.
Very, very powerful words to finish on, Rav. Bezrat Hashem, that it happens. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your reflections. Rabbi Walker, strength and courage as you seek to heal your community. Mr. Johnson, we very much look forward to hearing from you later on this evening. And likewise, Rabbi Margolin. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So, talking of all the horrible things that exist in dealing with anti-Semitism, one of the biggest cesspits out there is the realm of social media. And it's been on social media, it's really the front line, literally the front line of this hate. So for the next discussion on the front lines of hate, how social media and discourse of 120 characters entrenched, fostered, and encouraged anti-Semitic attitudes, it gives me great pleasure to introduce as our moderator a dear friend of ours from Belgium, Mr. Ralph Pais, who's the vice chairman of a Jewish Documentation and Information Center in Antwerp, Belgium, to chair this next discussion. Ralph, the symposium is yours, good sir.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. Dear friends, good afternoon. I hope you're still awake after all those emotional panels. It's a true honor to welcome you all today. Not just for another panel discussion, but for a meaningful moment of listening and understanding. Tomorrow, as you all know, we will walk together through Auschwitz. But before we do, we gather here to speak about courage, about truth, about change, and understanding. And the three people who I'm going to invite in a minute are remarkable voices of conscience. They all come from different worlds, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, and yet they share a common conviction that peace begins with truth, telling the truth, and that silence, when faced with hate, is never neutral. Last week, I had the privilege of giving a conference in the United States. And when I was finished, I told them about the fronts that we are looking at in order to fight anti-Semitism, which is media and politics and education. And I asked if there were any questions. And surprisingly, someone stood up and he said, I don't have a question, but I have a remark for you. You know, today, these three fronts you spoke about are important, but they are completely useless if you do not realize the power of this. And he raised his phone because he said that in the United States, and I'm sure that in Europe it's quite the same, people use their phones and social media for 5 to 8 hours a day. So let me now introduce those who are extremely activist and very visible on social media. And I, by the way, invite all of you to follow them if it's not the case yet. Let me start by introducing our first guest, Rawan Osman. Please give her a big round of applause. Rawan is a Syrian-born German activist, public speaker, and content creator dedicated to Arab-Israeli dialogue. And to countering anti-Semitism in the Arab world. Rawan is raised in Lebanon and in an anti-Semitic environment, and she now calls herself a recovered anti-Semite and works to replace fear with understanding. Thank you very much for being here. Please have a seat, Rawan. I'm gonna also invite the two other speakers, and I'll join you, and then we'll start. The second person I would like to introduce to you is Mr. Loay Al-Sharif. Mr. Al-Sharif is an advocate for the Abraham Accords and a peace advocate. He's a historian and social media influencer, as I mentioned, and whose mission is to bridge divides between Muslims and Jews and to champion peace in the Middle East. Thank you very much for being with us. And last but not least, Amjad Taha. Please give him a round of applause. Amjad is a British Arab journalist, analyst, and human rights activist known for his clear voice against extremism and misinformation. Through his commentary and media presence, he promotes truth, accountability, and coexistence across the Middle East and beyond. So it's a privilege to share this stage with you. I'm going to join you if there's a microphone for me. I think there is, yes. Okay. If there's something you need to correct, you can do it now.
I'll let you first correct.
Okay. Yes, this I know. All right. I will correct it. So it's important to mention that that Amjad is from the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which is, by the way, an example of tolerance, and we will discuss it a bit later as well. Okay. Rawan, if we can start with you. Many people follow you on social networks and see the work you do as an activist. Your journey began not with a political statement, but with a moment of fear and misunderstanding. It's a story that I personally heard once when you came to speak at the European Parliament. It's a remarkable story how, as a student in Europe, you accidentally walked into a kosher supermarket and froze. But if you don't mind, could you share that moment with all of us? For those who do not know the story, it's quite an extraordinary story.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. As you heard, I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese. My father is from Damascus, and he raised us in Lebanon, where my mother comes from. I actually attended a French Catholic school, and he wanted to raise us in a more European-like environment. We were tolerant, and my mother is the daughter of the Lebanese Civil War. The Lebanese society wanted to become tolerant, and they were. They avoided talking about what led to this civil war. The only thing everybody hated was the Jews, the Israelis, and the Zionists. And wherever I speak around the world, I make sure I mention those three terms because we use them interchangeably. There is no difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So when I was a teenager, was one of the many useful idiots you see around the world today. I was fond of Hezbollah. And I thought they were the only heroes who occasionally dared kill or kidnap an Israeli. I'm not proud of it, but in order to cure a disease, we have to have the right diagnosis. It was really easy for me to hate the Israelis/Jews/Zionists because Israel occupied South Lebanon. And I did not know why. I did not know that for more than a decade, Israel exercised restraint when Yasser Arafat and his gangsters, including Westerners, and I remind you of Baader Meinhof, for example, they abused Lebanese hospitality, Lebanese territory, and occasionally sent men and women to commit terror attacks inside Israel. After more than a decade, Israel decided to create a buffer zone. I did not know this. Only in my mid-20s, when I wanted to take a course in Europe, the natural choice was France because I spoke French. I landed and I knew that my accommodation was in the Jewish quarter, but I thought it was a Jewish quarter like the one in Beirut or Damascus. No Jews. Except this one was filled with Jews. And on the very first day, I went across the street to buy food. And I was shopping in a small store, filling my cart, surprised that I found the same ingredients I needed to cook, the same spices. Little I knew it was a kosher store. And I heard men enter the store, and I knew they were not speaking French. They were speaking Hebrew. Now, how would I know? I've never seen a Jew. More than 800,000 Jews were uprooted from the Arab world. Make sure you mention that when people talk to you about the Nakba. How would I know? And we have embedded in our constitutions and basic laws in most of the Arab world, anti-normalization laws forbidding people-to-people contact with Israelis even abroad. I knew it was Hebrew because back in my days, we had 3 TV channels and ugly big TVs and antennas we used to adjust when we were allowed to watch 20 minutes of cartoon in the afternoon. So when we got biblical cartoons from Israel, when Israel occupied South Lebanon, we watched. And when a grown-up walked into the room, they would freak out and change the channel. You're watching Israeli TV. On that afternoon in Strasbourg, in France, I realized that even the language was associated with taboo in my head, because when I turned and I saw 4 religious Jewish men dressed in white and black, I had my first panic attack. And I'm not the fearful type. I ran out of the store, leaving my shopping and my personal bag in the trolley, ran across the street without looking left and right, went up to my bedroom on the 3rd floor and locked the door. When I looked in the mirror, telling myself to calm down, I thought that was stupid, especially that I have to go back and collect my bag. So I decided to lie to the storekeeper. I went back, the man had left. I had composed myself. I told him that I forgot my purse, my wallet. I continued shopping as if nothing happened, went to pay, and the storekeeper asked me, "Where are you from?" I thought, fantastic, now he will have a panic attack. So I tried to be vague, told him from the Middle East, but he insisted. So I told him I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese, and he asked me how long I had lived in the Jewish quarter. And I told him that I arrived today. He smiled, and he knew exactly what happened earlier. And he was charming, pleasant. He helped me with my bags across the street. And for weeks, I was thinking, why did my body react that way? Although I've never spoken to a Jew, they didn't even look at me. And I concluded that I had a panic attack because I was sharing for the first time in my life the same space with a Jew, the enemy. Although I've never spoken to a Jew, I realized that my entire perception of Israel and the Jews was constructed by the one and only Secretary General of Hezbollah, or should I say former Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, who recently died, not of old age. Reading our history in the Middle East and having access to uncensored information in Europe, I know you understand what I mean, but I have to clarify to high school students and university students. Uncensored information means Wikipedia is banned in today's secular Turkey. So back in my days, I could only access what the state wanted us to access. Reading the history made me very angry because thousands of lives could have been spared had the Arabs accepted to share the land with the Jews who, unlike what we learned, did not stem for Eastern Europe. And here we go, I've been living in Europe now for 15 years, watching the unfortunate transformation. I share your frustration, but after October 7th, I decided to fight. We will fight, and we will take what is ours and help Israel prevail.
Thank you very, very much, Devon. Amjad, as someone based in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates, which is, as I said, a nation that outlawed hate and embraces tolerance, you've said that fighting anti-Semitism is not a Western duty, but a human one. Was there a personal moment that you can share with us when this became more than a principle, but when it became really your mission? Can you share that with us?
Well, thanks for having me. Let's start with the fact that we did free hostages, and we were very happy that a lot of hostages were freed by Israel in Gaza. But then we still have a lot of people in the West, including our colleague here, is a hostage of misinformations. And the misinformation that I mean here is a person, for example, as a UAE Emirati person, fighting against anti-Semitism all the way in the West. The Paliwoods, and that's why our colleague here became hostages of that misinformation, puts it as a British Arab, because they cannot understand that the Emirati person from UAE stands against anti-Semitism. Yes, in my country, and I am proud of that, in my country, anti-Semitism, not like the West, is an opinion. No, it's not an opinion. In fact, it's a crime. I'm proud to be from that country. Which is exactly why we got into the Abrahamic Accord, and how we stood for the Abrahamic Accord. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations. The Abrahamic Accord survived the 7th of October. We did not close the embassy for one day. The Israelis who were prevented or couldn't fly from Australia or the United States of America, as I spoke to some members of the Congress there, they came through Fly Dubai to Israel back and forth. Yes, that's our country. In a rainy day, you will see us. But in a rainy day, we've seen a lot of people in the West, just like when the Holocaust happened. When the Holocaust happened, and when the 7th of October happened. When the Holocaust happened, a lot of people participated in it. A lot of people celebrated it. And a lot of people also put a hand to help the Jewish community, hence why you're still here and you survived. On the 7th of October again, some participated in it. Some celebrated it, and we are proud to be on the chapter of putting our hand for the Jewish community and saying, we stand with you, and never again. It's now and again and again. We are proud to stand with Bibas family rather than standing with Sinwar and whoever glorifies that filthy animal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to Loe, please. You grew up in Saudi Arabia, surrounded also by distrust towards Jews, until you went studying in France, which changed everything. You once said that was your turning point. Can you share a little bit with us how that happened? And also, you didn't really answer to my question, but we'll get back to you right
As
after.
a political strategist, that's what we do. But we call him the Muslim rabbi in UAE.
First of all, thank you for having me. A real honor. And I want to say one thing. I have to say this before I move to the turning point. When October 7 happened and we started to condemn it publicly, Amjad and I, we were on the very front of doing that. And Amjad called me a week after. He said, listen, I want to tell you one thing. I see lots of people attacking you, but I want you to know I stand by you and we will prevail. Honestly, the vocals in the UAE, I can remember Amjad and I. And I was so proud that I joined arms with Amjad in speaking against what happened on October 7, because we knew it was evil from day one. So back to my upbringing. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, lived for a very long time to a mixed family, Egyptian, Saudi. And when I lived there, lots of indoctrination in school was so anti-Semitic. Now things changed. The Crown Prince did an amazing job in changing the education when he came into power. Yes, Egypt still needs to work on it. Saudi Arabia moved forward. So that was the young Lu'ay was indoctrinated with lots of hate. When I first met a Jew in my life, it was also in France. And by the way, every time I go to Paris, since 2010, I still go to the neighborhood that I first went to the first time, Opéra Lafayette. Always I go there because the family was living there. So the long story short is that after living with a traditional Jewish family, I learned a lot from the source. I learned a lot about Judaism from the source, not from the adversaries of Jews. I learned a lot about Israel. I learned a lot about the commonalities that we have. And I also realized that we can reconcile Islamic-Jewish relations. I always say it out loud in social media. It is so preposterous that we as Muslims, 1.8 billion people, name our children after Jewish prophets, kings, and heroes and revere them without knowing the details of those heroes, without knowing what these heroes believed in, without knowing the stories of those heroes, without knowing that David, whom millions of Muslims are named after, the Islamic version of, or the Arabic version of Dawood, was the one who proclaimed Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, not President Donald J. Trump. So this kind of knowledge really enabled me to realize that I've been lied to, and I started to become vocal in 2017, but wasn't very noticed. After October 7, or on the day of October 7, I asked myself a question: did you really change? Because there's a price to pay. There is a price to pay. But also, I always say, God closes doors, open windows. And now I'm speaking in Poland, I was speaking in Europe, America, Canada. I went to South Africa. I went to different places to speak about the Abraham Accords, which is, by the way, the greatest breakthrough in American foreign diplomacy. And that couldn't have happened without a strong American leadership that brought this to existence.
And it isn't finished yet, hopefully.
Of course.
Yes. Thank you very much. Rawan, I wanted to ask you that we just spoke about October 7th. The Arab world in general feels deeply with the suffering of Palestinians. My question to you is, why is it so that that often feels silent when Jews are attacked? And do you think that this can become universal?
The answer is simple. Since Israel became the first Jewish state, or shortly after, since the 50s, we have what I mentioned earlier, anti-normalization laws and policies. So a Kuwaiti, a Lebanese, an Algerian, for example, or an Iraqi who meet an Israeli in Sydney or in London are prohibited by law from speaking to them. What was the purpose of these laws? To dehumanize the Jew. If you have a conversation with an Israeli, that might undo the propaganda that you were subjected to. This is why I agree with Guterres. October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. What led to it was the demonization of the Jews and later of the Israelis. And I say the Jews and later the Israelis because starting in the 20s, when the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, learned about the Zionist movement, he started systematically dehumanizing the Jews, introducing some of the worst anti-Semitic tropes, even in Europe, translated in Arabic to the Arabic audience. In 1937, there was a conference in Bludan in southern Syria where most Arab leaders, including some Christians, were invited, subjected to this anti-Semitic propaganda. So why wouldn't all Arabs believe the lies, especially that all the Jews of this Arab world were uprooted, leaving behind their assets, properties, and the cemeteries of their ancestors. This is why on October 7th, we failed to sympathize even with women and children. But not only, we have a propaganda machine that is very difficult to combat, financed by Qatar. And if Al Jazeera gave them such a huge platform and allowed Hamas officials to repeatedly call the hostages prisoners of war and deny that they have targeted Israeli civilians, not only soldiers, not that it makes it better. And even though we saw in the first deal when a number of hostages were released, including children and the elderly, Hamas officials still got away with their lies, that would inevitably lead to what we're witnessing in the Arab world. And unfortunately, it infected the West.
So that's in fact indoctrination. And I think you once said that only education, or at least education, can replace indoctrination. But is that enough, in your opinion?
We are sitting here because we'd like to go to Auschwitz tomorrow, remind ourselves of what happened during the Holocaust. Does anyone here think that the Nazis asked voluntarily to be cured of Nazism, of their ideology? They did not do it voluntarily. We need intensive de-radicalization in large parts of the Arab world, but especially in Gaza. And this will not happen unless they are forced to go through intensive programs. How does that happen? With your help. Conditioned aid, that's one suggestion.
Indeed. And to get back for a moment to the UAE, a country, as I said, that turned tolerance into law, actually. Can that model of clear leadership, education, and very important, zero tolerance for hate, do you think that that can be duplicated, replicated elsewhere in the world, let's say in Europe, or are we too late already?
I think Europe right now has a huge anti-Semitism. Actually, there is more anti-Semites in Europe than there are in the Middle East right now. There are more Muslim Brotherhood members in Europe than there are in Afghanistan and Iraq. Unfortunately, that is the case, actually. Right now, you have European newspapers who glorify, for example, Sudan Muslim Brotherhood-led army, the Hamas of Africa. And at the same time, we had it a few months before where they were glorifying Hamas, the terrorists in Gaza. So would you have that in the UAE? No, you wouldn't. It's not about the freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
What you're having right now is a freedom of hate, freedom of violence. Because the law is not speaking in protection in Europe. It did not speak in protection of the Jewish community. And I tell you the differences here. The difference is we had one case of a rabbi which was murdered by terrorists, and those terrorists, they were a proxy of the Iranian regime.
And the reaction of the UAE was incredible.
Our reaction was very swift. It went all the way to Turkey where they were hiding for a few hours and got them all the way from Turkey, put them back into the prison, bring them back to the justice and sentence them to death. Because we do not tolerate anti-Semitism, because it will reach to another Holocaust, another 7th of October, which we do not want. Unfortunately, right now, when you speak about Germany, since the 7th of October, we're speaking about more than 8,766 incidents, that's vandalism and crimes against Jewish community. We're speaking about Australia, 5,000 cases. We're speaking about United Kingdom, over 2,000 cases, and so on, and so many cases. Those cases, there is families, there is children who are suffering and still suffering from those cases. What did you do about them? Just reporting them, that's about it. So the Jewish community right now, which started from a few of just, well, the Israeli, because we always had the Jewish community existed. The only thing that changed about after the Abrahamic Accord, it was the Israelis, they start getting visas. Otherwise, Rawan, in response to a comment that I had about what Rawan said, says the Arab world. What is the Arab world? Where is the Arab world? Where does it start from? Where does it end? We are not all the same. Moroccans are not exactly the same mentality as the Algerian. Very different. Bahrainis are not exactly as the same mentality as the Qataris. And the UAE, definitely we stand out from the rest around us and on the other side. So the Arab world is not all one color. The Arab world, not all one anti-Semitism. And the Arab world stopped listening to the Palestinians' terrorist propaganda. And the best example of that is, by the way, is that the spokesperson of Hamas was put about 17 statements asking the Arab world to protest and go against the American, which are the alliances of Israel. How many protests did you see going out?
None, because they're not allowed and tolerated in most of the Arab world.
We're not speaking about the wars who are not allowed. I'm speaking about literally about Lebanon. I'm speaking about Jordan. I'm speaking about those countries which are allowed to protest, and you are protesting. And when they protested, there were a couple of hundreds. This in 2003, where people could not communicate through Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok and others and see what the Israelis, they don't eat people, they actually normal people, speak to people and so on. In 2003, their only source and reference for information was Al Jazeera. Right now, they have multi-sources, so those youth and youngsters, they no longer listen to those propaganda, and they becoming more and more civilized and communicating with the Israeli people. They now understand that they actually, in Israel, there is 13 people, members of the parliament who are Arabs, Muslims, and so on, and Bedouins who are representing those Arabs and been elected by the Arabs community in the state of Israel. There's more than 300 mosques, 400 imams, the Zionist government pays for their salary and so on, bring the Holy Quran, puts it in the mosque and makes them worship and so on. That they didn't know about and would not know about, as you said, from Al Jazeera channel, which is based in Qatar, in Doha. They would not know about it. But because of the social media and all this, right now, people are less tolerant of the propaganda. But again, right now you have the hostages of misinformation and the hostages of Hamas propaganda just outside this door.
Yeah. So speaking of social media, Lo, I have a question for you. As an activist, you are often attacked, criticized by, I would say, extremes from different sides. You once said that you would support a future Palestinian state on the condition that its future leadership would recognize Israel and the safety of Israel. And that, again, caused a lot of criticism, and some people even called you a traitor. How do you handle that? How do you face all this hate that comes towards you?
I handle hate with lots of patience, I would say, because don't forget that one day I was in their shoes. I was repeating the same lies. And I say it again, a Palestinian state is not a priority and shouldn't be a priority. I believe in the right of the Palestinians to live in dignity. I believe the Palestinians are not going anywhere, just like the Jews in Israel or the Israelis are not going anywhere. But the priority should be focused on finding a Palestinian leadership that is willing to do 4 things. Recognize Israel as a Jewish state, stop teaching their kids hatred, embrace living side by side with Israel, and defeating this ideology of hate. If these conditions are met, people in Tel Aviv will march into the streets asking for a Palestinian state.
You're asking for a miracle. That's not going to happen.
And what?
It's a miracle you're asking for.
Yes. But of course, it has to come from a leadership that believes in these kind of values in the Palestinian domain. So this should be the priority. But in social media, I handle these kind of stuff with knowledge, most importantly. And speaking of knowledge, when we talk about anti-Semitism, the way I approach it on social media, combating anti-Semitism, I always remind people, especially here in Europe, with all due respect, many Europeans, especially white European Gen Zs, who think that they are experts in the Middle East and they have never set foot in the Middle East, I want to remind them, listen to the voices that know. And also, anti-Semitism starts with Jews and ends with each and every one of us. Anti-Semitism starts with the Jews but doesn't end with the Jews. So we need to have some sort of more education into the social media, because the battlefield right now is social media. The battlefield is TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook. So this is how I approach it. I don't approach it with, as you can see in my social media, I don't really get angry, because I have been in their shoes, and I always know, oh, I've heard that. I know how to say this. Oh, I used to say that. All the lies that are circulating right now. When I was a teenager, I'm 42 now, not a teenager anymore. When I was a teenager, I got them all.
So you don't fight hate with hate.
I don't fight hate with hate at all. I never fight hate with hate.
Right.
I really want to change people's minds and hearts to the idea to believe in a Middle East where Israel is a part of the Middle East, because it has always been a part. Just today, 6 hours ago, I posted a video on my Instagram, and please follow, like, and share, a video that talks about the ancient kingdom of Israel that existed 2,700 years ago. And I was having a dialogue with a Jordanian friend who said, no, my grandma is older than Israel. I said, let's go to a Jordan Museum in Amman and read Mesha Stela. Stela is like an inscription on a rock that is like 2,700 years old. It talks about Umri, the king of Israel, who oppressed the Moabites. Israel is there because it has always been there. And a Muslim should never have a problem with the legitimacy of Israel. So this is my point, is I want to change minds and hearts of Muslims to accept Israel. You can have a debate about this government, that government, right or left, but even though I'm a Likudi, right wing, but I'm just saying that.
Not only a rabbi, but also a Likudi.
Right wing as wing. Yeah, so this is the battle that we need to fight, social media battle.
I think we would like to take also afterwards a couple of questions from the audience, because many people told me would love to ask a question. So if you have questions, please prepare. But before we do that, Rawan, I wanted to ask you something. If you could whisper one sentence or one question in the ears of every young Arab in the world, what would your message be? Difficult one.
No, not at all. If I may say something about social media first. Amjad is right. The Arab world is not monolithic. And if we think about what happened after the signing of the historic Abraham Accords, we will understand that it's not all doom and gloom. There is a lot of potential. And it changes, especially because of the tools of social media. Without it, anti-normalization laws dictated the rules of the games. Today, even a child in China, no matter how the state wants to censor information, they will get around and have access to the other's narrative. I became a public speaker after October 7th, and I travel around the world, and unfortunately, especially in Europe, I need bodyguards, a lot of bodyguards if I speak at universities. And groups of Arabs sometimes approach me and the bodyguards push them away because they don't understand what they're telling me. Wherever I go around the world, I have to tell the bodyguards, leave them, they're friends. They approach me to tell me, we're proud of you. We wish we could do what you're doing. Arabs, even Iranians, who understood, thanks to social media, that the Israelis are not demons. There is a lot of potential, but for that to happen, for more peace to be a reality in the Middle East, we need to call a spade a spade. Forgive me, but this is an important thing to share. After October 7th, on October 8th, I had to go to Berlin from South Germany, where I live. And ironically, we had a one-week conference on anti-Semitism. I went to Berlin where Samidun, which is affiliated with BDS and now banned, distributed baklava on the streets. And after 1 week, on Friday, although experts were invited from all over the world to educate us on anti-Semitism, on Friday, I asked this professor, when were we going to talk about anti-Semitism in the Arab world? She said, we don't have data, because the Arab world doesn't acknowledge anti-Semitism is a problem. So research and laws are things that are desperately needed for us to combat what's happening, with the combination added to social media, giving people access to information, the world might look better. What I tell Arabs who don't like me, Israel is not the problem, political Islam is. And I tell them, be a better Arab, be a better Muslim. Look at the UAE, watch and learn.
Thank you for your honesty and your courage. I know that we have many more things to say, but we're on the clock, unfortunately. Who in the audience has a question for one of the panelists? If so, please start with your name and please also address to who you want to address yourself. Michael Freilich.
Thank you. I'm Michael Freilich from Belgium. Disinformation, I mean, we heard it. I'll keep my question short. I don't speak Arabic, but I hear from many people, including from you, what Al Jazeera does and how it poisons the minds. Now, there's two Al Jazeeras. You have the English-speaking Al Jazeera TV and the Arabic-speaking. I was told that the Arabic-speaking is far worse, and it is something that you can turn on in my country and in many countries, probably here as well. Turn it on the TV, you'll find Al Jazeera in Arabic. Do you believe Al Jazeera in Arabic should be banned in Europe?
Who wants to answer this?
Yeah, I'll start with this. Al Jazeera has been banned in the UAE. It's banned. You can't be a correspondent of Al Jazeera and go to UAE. Why? Because we're a smart nation. We saw Bin Laden first time goes on Al Jazeera and he gives exclusive to Al Jazeera. So we know this is Bin Laden channel. This is ISIS channel. This is Al Qaeda channel. This is Houthis channel. This is Hamas channel. The simple thing you can do is ban it. Or you can allow it, and if someone, and the next time you see a Bin Laden, call him an activist or make him a correspondent in Belgium. You can do so. So we banned it. In Israel, up to the 7th of October, Al Jazeera is running the anti-Semite channel on the existing universe that says capital anti-Semite, proud to be. It was running from Israel. Muslim Brotherhood right now is not banned in Israel, is not banned in Belgium, is not banned in Europe, it's not banned in the United States of America, but it's banned fully in the UAE. The Islamic Relief sends a humanitarian aid, it says, but it was sending it to Hamas. Islamic Relief takes money from your pocket and others as a charity. It's registered in the UK, in Birmingham. He has the biggest station. He has sent millions and millions and millions to Boko Haram, to others and so on. Islamic Relief, it's banned in the UAE. Right. So when it comes to Al Jazeera, there is the UAE, nothing happened there. We banned it, we're surviving, we're doing great. Try banning it. Maybe you survive, maybe you do something better, at least the Arabic one.
And I want to add one thing, if you may, to the gentleman who asked about Al Jazeera Arabic and English. I'm going to give you a metaphor, please use it from now on. Al Jazeera Arabic is the official spokesman of Hamas. Al Jazeera English is the official spokesman of the LGBT community.
And when they succeed, they make LGBTQ or queers for Palestine.
Chicken for KFC, exactly.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but I was told that we need to stop already because we're running late. But I guess that you will be around, and if many other questions that are still in the audience, people can maybe come and see you in private, of course.
One last word to the Jewish community all around the world. You have friends, and we are proud to be all the way from UAE. You have home, you have family, you have friends, you have people who love you, care about you, sees you as a normal human being, just like us, all of us. And you're not alone. And the 7th of October was a test. We were there, others weren't. And at the same time, a brave woman like Rawan, we are very proud of, because she's a woman, and it's really hard to be a woman in the Middle East.
So let's finalize this panel with a word from Rawan. Ladies first, but in this case, maybe a final word from you.
You know that as someone who has my background, I'm not allowed to go to Israel. But with my German passport, I have been to Israel 14 times since October 7th, and I'm returning for the 15th time now on Wednesday. I've lived in 7 countries. I have never witnessed anything like Israel. I love these people with all my heart, although they bicker. What you see on the screen is not reality. I invite everyone who can to go and travel around Israel and see how Muslims and Druze and Christians and Jews live together. This is an example that should inspire the rest of the world. And I'm closing with this expression, being in Poland. If there's an Israeli embassy in Germany and a German embassy in Israel, in spite of the Holocaust, everything's possible, including peace in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. I will give the floor back to Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph, for your masterful moderation, and to our panelists who clearly have learnt the first rule of show business, which is always leave your audience wanting more. Thank you so much. It was very, very enlightening. Also, thank you to my esteemed colleague, Meital Nachmias, who worked very, very hard to make that panel happen. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we close this symposium, just a message for the members of our media corps that are still here. At 6:30, if you would like to make your way back into this hall, there will be a press briefing, which I can assure you, you do not want to miss. So, with that said, thank you for your attention so far, and I leave the closing of this symposium to my colleague, Mr. David Lager, the Secretary General of the EGA. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And as we close this day, I want to thank you all, speakers, guests, and partners, for the openness and depth you have brought to every conversation. I mean, we began by learning new ways to measure anti-Semitism, because what we do not measure, we cannot fight. We heard how laws can protect, how education can change minds, and how justice depends not only on courts, but on the courage to act. The memorial from Manchester moved us all. It showed what happens when hatred is ignored. And it reminded us that silence never protects the victims, only the aggressors. We also spoke about the new front lines of hate, how social media and online platforms have become the place where lies and conspiracies are spread faster than truth. We learned how words can now travel instantly to millions, and how that makes our responsibility to answer them even greater. So when we look at anti-Semitism today, we see that it changes its language and its symbols, but it's still the same hatred. It attacks the same people, and it threatens the same values. That's why we came here, not only to remember, but to begin a new chapter of responsibility. And please, this is not the end of a conference, it is the beginning of our work. What starts here in Krakow must continue in our parliaments, in our classrooms, and on our screens. We need to be present wherever hatred tries to grow, and we need to make sure that our voice is stronger than the lies. We all know this will take time, but after what we have shared today, I believe that we are ready. There is courage in this room, there is experience, and there is unity. And together we can turn remembrance into change, not only in words, but in action. Together, as we share dinner tonight, we continue that conversation in friendship and in solidarity. It is a time to connect, to reflect, and to renew our strength for what lies ahead. And tomorrow, when we walk through the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we will do so not only as witnesses of history, but as guardians of the future. Thank you so much for being a part of this, for standing with us, and for proving through your presence that your commitment commitment that this will never be allowed to happen again. Not on my watch and not on ours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And literally, just the last word, I promise you. Far be it from me to spread fake news. The actual media briefing will be in the London room, the London room. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back here for dinner at 8 o'clock. Please take your personal belongings with you. And also I would ask you politely to vacate the room as soon as possible so we can work our magic and turn this into a wonderful dinner for you. Thank you so much.